A girl named Chung Yuchi showed up at the post station and outbid everyone for my manuscript, offering 1,500 coins. She's about 13 or 14, from the powerful Chung family. Manager Lee gave her a copy of my Jean magazine to pass along to someone called Yunshang with a message about marriage. After that, the other managers had no choice but to leave deposits for the next issue instead. Yuchi came to my village, Xiago, mainly because she'd run out of the drunken crab I gave her last time. She brought along a cold-looking young boy in white carrying a sword. Actually a girl dressed as a man, called Third Son. This person got really excited seeing my 20 Fergana horses, since even one cost 300 strings of coins in the capital. I spotted them from the hill and ran down to greet Yuchi. She arrived right at breakfast time, clearly on purpose, so I promised to cook for her personally. She forgot all about her sword-carrying companion and followed me up the hill eagerly, while the boy stayed behind admiring the horses. Up on the hill, the villagers had just finished handing off 5,000 buns to the mail courier. When everyone saw Yuchi, this gorgeous girl in yellow with snow-white skin, they all froze. My little sister called her a fairy sister, which broke the awkward silence and made everyone laugh. I introduced Yuchi to the villagers. She was humble and sweet, telling everyone to just call her Cheer. Second grandpa seated her at the stone table and ordered drinks. I told them not to fill her up on snacks because I was about to cook something special, then ran off to the kitchen while she watched me go with a mix of embarrassment and excitement. The villagers whispered among themselves, clearly wondering what exactly was going on between us. While I was busy cooking in the kitchen, things got lively outside. My mother and Aunt Hua were whispering about Yuchi. Aunt Hua said the girl was gorgeous, and only I was worthy of her in the whole village. My mother just sighed and said nothing. I think she's trying not to overthink it. Down at the horse field, that Third Son, Li Yunshang, got herself into real trouble. She's actually a girl from a military family dressed as a man, and unlike the way kid who visited before, Yunshang is so convincingly masculine that even old man Tian couldn't tell she was a woman. She went straight for Lightning, my brother Juanmai's horse. Old man Tian tried to warn her, but she'd already jumped on. Lightning is the most violent horse we have. Nobody in the whole village can handle him except my brother. The horse bucked, leaped half a zhang into the air, and launched Yunshang flying. She was spinning through the air, already making peace with broken bones, when my brother caught her mid-fall. He held her in his arms, confused why this man screamed like a girl. When she demanded he put her down, my brother just dropped her on the spot. She hit the ground and accidentally let out her real voice. She was furious, glaring at him and muttering that both the horse and its owner were no good. My brother ignored the attitude and started his daily training routine right there in the horse field. He rode Lightning through the obstacle course, slashing wooden posts with his sword. Old man Tian and sixth uncle were watching and noted he'd gotten faster, down from 12 breaths to 10. The four old men even placed bets on how many rabbits my brother would hunt tomorrow. Meanwhile, Yunshang stood there completely stunned. She couldn't believe my brother's sword had pierced clean through a solid wooden post as thick as a man's torso. Over at the horse field, Yunshang called my brother a blockhead to get his attention. When he told her his name, Junmai, she was shocked. Turns out my brother is famous around Jingyang as the Little Wild Bull, the strongest man in the area. Yunshang asked to borrow his sword, Frost Sorrow, to examine it. My brother agreed to lend it for 1 incense stick's worth of time, but she got completely lost studying every detail. The skull on the handle, the goat horns, the 2-section grip, the strange inscriptions. 2 incense sticks passed, and she still wouldn't give it back, mumbling to herself about the design. My brother finally had to snatch it out of her hands. She got angry, saying he broke his promise. He pointed out the time had long passed, and told her Yuchi had been calling for her to come eat. She begged for more time. 1 incense stick, no half, no even just a cup of tea's worth. My brother recognized that look in her eyes. It was the same way he looked at weapons, pure love and respect for the craft. When he asked if she loved weapons, she got all proud and claimed nobody in the world knew more about blades than her, from ancient stone axes to the Tang Dynasty's new Modeo. She got so excited she forgot to disguise her voice and spoke in her real feminine tone. My brother immediately called her young lady. She was furious and stomped her feet. Now this blockhead knew her secret, and worse, he'd held her in his arms earlier. My brother softened up and lent her the sword for as long as she wanted. She accepted but told him to call her third son, Li Sanlang, and not young lady. He agreed and led her up the hill to eat. Meanwhile, I'd been busy cooking. I brought out steamed egg custard with sesame oil and scallions, and garlic mashed river shrimp for Yuchi. I sat right next to her, shoulder to shoulder, and explained how I made soy sauce from soybeans, something I'd learned from my cookbook. Watching her eat happily made me feel warm inside, like watching my little sister enjoy a meal. Second grandpa walked over to my mother looking worried, saying I seemed bewitched. My mother just said to let me be. DeBeo watched Yuchi demolish dish after dish and commented the girl could really eat. My mother said that too was fine. Being able to eat is a blessing. Up on the hill, everyone was having a great time eating together. Yunshang enjoyed the food so much she forgot all about my brother holding her earlier. Those two actually hit it off at the table, drinking and chatting, even agreeing to have a friendly sparring match later. I couldn't help but shake my head at this Li Yunshang. First we had the way girl visiting dressed as a boy, now this one calling herself third son. What's with Tang Dynasty women and disguising themselves as men? Don't they realize they're missing a certain thing called an Adam's apple? After breakfast, I took Yuchi to see the pickle workshop. She was really curious about the process, and I didn't hide anything from her. Besides, the key ingredient, chili powder, doesn't even exist in the Tang Dynasty yet. Meanwhile, my brother took Yunshang to the school building so she could sketch Frost's sorrow. He already considered her a kindred spirit over their shared love of weapons, and happily helped her grind ink and lay out paper. Third uncle and second grandpa exchanged looks. What could possibly be more important to these brothers than making money? Over at the Jingyang Post Station, things were going wild. The place was packed wall to wall. My 5,000 buns had mostly sold out within an hour. Word had spread among travelers that the station had amazing steamed buns, especially the crab meat ones. And since anyone traveling by horse in this era has money, the customers kept coming. Then General Zhang Liang showed up, a hero of the Xuanwu Gate incident, one of the most powerful men in the empire. He was seeing off some of his warrior brothers and wanted them fed properly. When he found out the buns were rationed at 2 per person, he got upset. He dumped gold and silver on the table and demanded enough buns for his whole group, plus 100 each for the ones traveling far. Constable Chui rushed off toward my village to place an emergency order. Manager Li remembered the jar of drunken crab I'd given him. He could barely chew it himself with his bad teeth, so he offered it to Zhang Liang's group. They went crazy for it. The rich crab roe, the fragrant wine broth, the fact that it tasted nothing like the boiled or roasted crab they knew. They ate all 11 crabs, shells and all, crunching everything down. Zhang Liang loved it so much he ordered 100 jars delivered to his mansion, tossing Li a bag of gold and silver without even asking the price. Manager Li accepted it without worrying about the exact cost. He figured he and I could settle up later. I was in the pickle workshop teaching Yuchi how to make pickled vegetables when second grandpa called me out. The delivery crew from the Wei mansion had finally arrived. Yuchi told me not to worry about her and ran off to ride horses at the field. Sweet girl, didn't want to be in the way. The delivery team was about a dozen strong men from Chang'an's Wanyan County Post Station. Their leader, a guy named Sun Feng, recognized Yuchi and seemed startled to see her here. That made him treat me with extra respect. He probably figured I had connections with the Chung family. My pickled vegetable jars are small, about the size of fruit cans, sealed with cork, cloth, and mud, the best vacuum packaging I can manage. 20 jars fit in one bamboo basket, worth 600 coins per basket. The Wei Mansion's 200 jars only filled 10 baskets, barely taking up any space on their big horse carts. The delivery guys felt a bit silly bringing so many carts for so little cargo. I saw my chance. Since they were heading back to Chang'an anyway, and they delivered to the palace for free, I asked them to take the palace's 300 jars of pickles too. Sun Feng agreed right away, no charge for imperial deliveries. Saved me a nice chunk on shipping. Then everything went crazy. Constable Chui galloped in, begging me for help. He needed 600 buns immediately for General Zhang Liang's group at the station. Right behind him came Lu Fei with an order for 100 jars of drunken crab, also from Zhang Liang, along with a bag of gold and silver as payment. I opened the money bag. Gold leaves worth 1.5 liang plus 15 silver ingots. Over 30 strings of copper coins total. My light screen showed I could recycle the gold alone for 15,000 yuan. I priced the drunken crab at 300 coins per jar, 10 times the pickle price. Each jar cost me around 10 yuan to make thanks to buying ingredients through the light screen. So at 300 coins, that's a fantastic profit. The 30-odd strings of copper covered exactly 100 jars. For the buns, second grandpa said we already had over 1,000 ready since Ugly Annie had kept the stove running all morning. Constable Chui took them all and doubled his daily order going forward, 10,000 buns per day from now on. After they ran off to load up, I recycled the gold through my light screen. My balance jumped to 258,080 yuan. I'd already earned back the cost of the flour and then some. Then I looked over at Sun Feng and his half-empty carts. An idea started forming in my head. I invited him to stay for lunch, maybe wait until the afternoon heat passed before heading back. After all, there was no rush, right? At the village entrance, my brother and I said goodbye to Yuqi and Yunshang. I'd wasted too much time having lunch with Sun Feng and missed my chance to spend more quality time with Yuqi. I tried to get her to stay overnight by promising cake, but she said her mother, from the strict Chui family, would punish her if she didn't get home. Yunshang reluctantly returned Frost's sorrow to my brother. Her own sword looked fine on the outside, but the blade inside was actually snapped clean. My brother had cut right through it during their sparring. She promised to come back in a few days with weapons she designed herself. My brother agreed, and those two made plans to fight again. Before Yuqi left, I told her she could send letters anytime asking for food, and I'd have it delivered. Chang'an is only half a day by fast horse. She blushed and quietly agreed. After they left, I called a meeting at my house, the first real business meeting for our village operations. My brother stood guard at the gate while everyone gathered in the courtyard. I had all my key people there. Aunt Hua running the dried fish workshop, my mother running the pickle workshop, second grandpa on pottery, sixth uncle on logistics, Ugly Annie on the kitchen, third uncle on the school and printing shop, and Dashin and Debeo handling accounts and purchasing. First, I announced that every manager would get 1 string of copper coins per month as salary on top of what they already earn. My mother nearly protested. 1 string is a lot, enough to marry a wife with 3, but I told her to hear me out. Then I laid out the numbers. The kitchen alone, with 10,000 buns a day, brings in over 10,000 coins daily. That's 300 strings per month. My mother went quiet after hearing that. I told them Constable Chui is hiring 50 workers for us, 20 women for the kitchen to make buns, 20 for 6th uncle's logistics team, and 10 for 2nd grandpa's pottery workshop. They'll get room, board, and 100 coins monthly. I told 6th uncle to build temporary shelters at the village entrance for the new workers and reminded 2nd grandpa to keep working on perfecting the toilet. We need a smooth glaze finish so waste rinses off clean. For my mother, I assigned the 100-jar drunken crab order. She and Aunt Hua will work together. Aunt Hua's fish team will supply the crabs, so the kids can focus on studying. My mother suggested trading buns for crabs from other villages, but I told her to pay fair market price. I handed her 5,000 coins from the morning's bun sales for purchasing. Finally, I turned to third uncle about the magazine. I'd given all remaining first edition copies of Jin to Sun Feng to distribute in Chang'an as free samples, an investment to build buzz. We already had 11 paid orders for the second issue, just from yesterday's deliveries around Jingyang. With Chang'an's population of millions and at least 10 to 20% being literate, I told third uncle to print 10,000 copies of the second issue. He could hardly believe the number, but I was confident. I was actually worried it wouldn't be enough. Early next morning, Constable Chui showed up before dawn with his crew to pick up 10,000 buns. I sat with him eating porridge while we waited. He told me his plan for the pickles. He buys them from me at 30 coins a jar, splits each jar into 10 small dishes, and sells each dish for 5 coins. That's 50 coins per jar, 20 coins profit. I called him a crook, but he made a fair point. The people stopping at his station are all wealthy travelers who expect good food and don't care about price. I fired back that I knew he was marking up my buns too, selling 3 for 5 coins, pocketing 2 coins profit each. He was surprised I found out, but I told him the 50 workers he hired for me liked to gossip. He dropped the act and paid everything up front, no haggling. The day's order came to 12,500 coins for buns plus 3 strings for pickles. I had to Bayo count and record it all. Constable Chui rushed off to get back before the morning crowd hit the station. Meanwhile in Chang'an, things were getting wild. Sun Feng, the delivery guy from yesterday, had left copies of My Jean magazine on his desk at the Wanyan County Post Station. His boss, a station manager named Wang Chong from the Wang clan, grabbed one and stayed up all night reading The Butterfly Lovers. He was so hooked he stormed into Sun Feng's office demanding the next volume immediately, threatening to dock his pay. But that was just the beginning. The people Sun Feng had delivered free copies to started showing up at the post station in droves. They were all furious that the story was unfinished and demanded the next issue. These weren't ordinary folk. They were powerful families from the capital. One household sent a servant with 100 coins for 5 copies. The Yang family wanted 25 copies for 500 coins. The Qin family ordered 10. The Su family another 25. Then a man from Pinkong Bookshop showed up and dropped a deposit for 5,000 copies, plus an invitation for Sun Feng and Wang Chong to dine at a fancy restaurant to discuss business. Poor Sun Feng was caught in the middle of a storm I'd started, and the second issue wasn't even printed yet. What I didn't know at the time was that my little magazine had stirred up a hornet's nest in Chang'an. Sun Feng got dragged to the Emerald Willow Pavilion, a high-class pleasure house in Pinkong District that he could never afford on his salary. His boss Wang Chong tagged along, but the moment they walked into the private room, Wang Chong spotted the host and went pale. He dropped to his knees and called the man 13th uncle. The man was Wang Yuan, the head of all the Taiyuan Wang clan's business operations in Wanyan County. Even the county magistrate, who's related to the Changsun imperial in-laws, has to show him respect. Turns out the Pinkong Bookshop that ordered 5,000 copies of my magazine belongs to him too. Wang Yuan dismissed his nephew like flicking away dust and sat down with Sun Feng alone. He wanted to know everything about the story magazine. Sun Feng told him what he knew, that I'm a teenage boy from Xiago village, that I supply goods to the Wei Mansion and the Imperial Palace, and that he saw Cheng Yuqi at my village. Wang Yuan quietly pieced it together, connections to Wei Zheng, Cheng Yaojin, and even the emperor himself. Wang Yuan ordered Sun Feng to bring back pickles along with the next issue of the magazine. Then he told Sun Feng to spend the night at the pavilion and left. But things got darker after that. Wang Yuan went to a hidden room upstairs where the madam of the Emerald Willow, a woman called Yinner, was waiting nervously. He told her to send someone to get information out of Sun Feng, because something didn't add up. He was suspicious about the paper I use. He didn't believe a young farmer could produce it. Wang Yuan ordered Yinner to send a newly trained girl to investigate, someone being controlled through her little brother's safety. Before leaving, he warned Yinner with a cold threat. If she couldn't handle the matter of the gray paper quietly, she should prepare to join her dead parents in the afterlife. So without me knowing it, a powerful clan was now watching me, and they were sending a spy my way. Sun Feng showed up at dawn, still half drunk from spending the night at the Emerald Willow. He dropped a bomb on third uncle at breakfast. We needed 15,000 copies of Jean. Pinkong Bookshop ordered 5,000, Huayuan Bookshop another 5,000, and various smaller buyers added up to nearly 4,000 more. Third uncle dropped his bowl and chopsticks and sprinted to my house to wake me up. At first I played it cool. 200,000 copies for 100 strings of coins. Sounded like a lot, but not that impressive when you convert it. Then I did the math in gold. 40 liang of gold equals roughly 400,000 yuan on my light screen. That's enough for the 3 Lotus Jade pool upgrade. I snapped awake instantly. I told third uncle to print like crazy and borrowed sixth uncle's logistics crew for the day. I promised every worker 10 extra coins and bonus eggs and meat buns in the morning if they pulled it off. Over in Chang'an, the 2 bookshops couldn't have been more different. Pinkong Bookshop, backed by the powerful Taiyuan Wang clan, serves wealthy families. Servants place orders and books get delivered door to door. Huayuan Bookshop is backed by the imperial family, started years ago by some princesses wanting pocket money. It serves the common people on the poorer west side of the city. At Huayuan, the first batch of 5,000 copies sold out fast. The crowd outside refused to leave, waiting for more stock. Poor people can't each afford 20 coins for a book, so they pool money and share copies. An old accountant at the shop had snagged a second issue copy for himself. A poor scholar offered to trade his first-issue copy for it. Since only 800 first editions exist in all of the Tang dynasty, the old man agreed. That first edition was already becoming a collector's item. The best part, that scholar took his new second-issue copy straight to a tea house outside the bookshop, pulled out a storyteller's wooden block, slapped it on the table, and started performing the butterfly lover's story aloud for the waiting crowd, asking just a coin or two for his trouble. My magazine was already creating its own economy. What I didn't know was that the butterfly lovers had completely taken over Chang'an. The story had existed as a folk tale for nearly 300 years since the Eastern Jin dynasty, passed down by word of mouth across different ethnic groups. But nobody had ever put it into a proper printed publication before. Now with my magazine spreading it everywhere, the whole city went crazy for it. The buzz reached all the way to the imperial palace. Empress Changsun, a woman who loved strong, independent female characters, got her hands on both issues. Princess Danyang had brought them during a morning visit. The Empress read the whole thing in one instant six time and immediately wanted more. When Emperor Li Shimin came to visit her at Ganlu Hall, she tried hinting that she'd finished the story too fast and the next issue wouldn't come out until the next rest day. The Emperor pretended not to understand, teasing her. She pouted. He laughed, then promised to send someone to find the rest of the story for her right away. He waved his hand behind him, and someone silently went to handle it. Li Shimin picked up a copy himself, but skipped the butterfly lover's story. He didn't dare get hooked on fiction. Instead, he flipped to my lifestyle tips section on page 6. One tip caught his eye. Eating meat and drinking tea together causes constipation. He rubbed his belly. He'd actually been constipated for days. He quietly wondered if he should stop his habit of drinking tea right after meals. The Empress told him she'd already had the palace doctors check all the health tips in the magazine. They confirmed everything except 2 items they were still testing, the one about meat and tea, and another about boiling water to prevent dysentery. Li Shimin told her that if those tips proved true, the author deserved a reward. Then he rubbed his stomach again, feeling something hard in there. All build-up, no relief. The Emperor's eunuchs actually fought over who got to come fetch the butterfly lover's manuscript for the Empress. A young eunuch named Huang and won the job, partly because he was the fastest at copying books. His colleagues wanted him to secretly transcribe as much as possible for them too. Huang and found Sun Feng at the Wanyan post station, and they rode straight to my village, arriving in the late afternoon. On the way in, they passed our delivery carts heading out with the remaining 10,000 copies of the second issue. When I learned Huang and was sent by the Emperor himself, I wasn't too surprised. I sat him down at the food hall and treated him properly. Most people treat eunuchs like dirt, but he's about my age, and I felt sorry for him. I brought out fried chicken and cola. The chicken was made by Ugly Annie and Aunt Hua following my recipe. It came out a bit dark on the coating, but tasted almost exactly like KFC. The cola was bulk soda I'd bought through the light screen, poured into clay jars with ice. Everyone assumed I'd brewed some kind of sweet drink. Huang forgot all his manners once he tasted the fried chicken and cola. After eating his fill, he noticed I kept staring at him. He thought I wanted a favor, but actually I'd been thinking about something ever since I learned he was a eunuch. I couldn't help myself and blurted out, "Do you pee standing up or squatting?" Sun Feng's jaw dropped. I immediately regretted asking. Huang took it surprisingly well. I changed the subject and handed him 2 things. A sheet of A4 paper to deliver to the Emperor, and the complete butterfly lover's manuscript for the Empress. I asked him to pass along a message. Since the magazine was still serializing the story, I hoped she'd keep the manuscript safe and not lose it. At the village entrance, just as Huang was climbing into the carriage, I slipped him a small porcelain bottle. He looked at it, and his eyes went red. He understood instantly what it was for. Eunuchs have a problem. They can't fully control their bladder, so they constantly smell of urine. It's one of the reasons people avoid them. I told him to just point the nozzle at his clothes and press once. The jasmine fragrance lasts a full day. Huang could barely speak. He just said he'd remember my kindness and left. After they were gone, Ugly Auntie was scrubbing down the chair Huang had sat in. DeBeo started making a thoughtless comment about eunuchs being unable to continue their family line, but Ugly Annie shut him up with a glare. I walked home without saying much. The world has too many sad things. On the carriage ride back to Chang'an, Huang changed out of his urine-stained undergarments in private and tried the spray bottle on himself. The smell vanished completely. He pulled back the window curtain, looked back toward my village, and whispered his thanks. And his answer? He standing up. Back at the palace, Huang delivered everything. He gave the butterfly lover's manuscript to the Empress's people and rushed the A4 paper to Emperor Li Shimin personally. The emperor confirmed that Huang had received the paper openly, in front of villagers and Sun Feng, and that nobody had seen what was written inside. Li Shimin unfolded my letter and smiled. I'd written out the formula for making my gray paper, the cheap kind I use for printing. He muttered that the process was surprisingly simple, costing less than a fifth of regular rice paper. He called it a gift too generous to refuse. He tucked it carefully inside a copy of Records of the Grand Historian on his bookshelf. Then he spoke to someone hidden behind that same bookshelf, apparently a secret bodyguard, telling them to rest at home after the memorial services for the dead princes were finished. A hoarse voice answered, "Thank you, Your Majesty," from inside. Li Shimin also put down his teacup after remembering my magazine tip about tea and meat causing constipation. He summoned his 3 top advisors, Changsun Wuji, Feng Xinling, and Du Ruhui. Meanwhile, my magazine was causing chaos at General Cheng Yaojin's mansion. Everyone in Chang'an assumed the Cheng family was behind Jin because of Yuqi's connection to me. Cheng Yaojin spent the whole day getting invitation cards from friends and officials, all mentioning Jin. He was completely baffled. He'd never even heard of it and didn't own a single bookshop. A note from his sworn brother Qin Xiong finally gave him a clue. It mentioned Yuqi by name. Cheng Yaojin figured the mystery was connected to his young family member, but decided to visit Qin Xiong first before confronting her. The next morning at Qin Xiong's mansion, Cheng Yaojin walked in expecting a quiet chat, but found Su Shiji, another old war buddy from their bandit days. Already they're looking furious. Su Shiji accused Cheng Yaojin of hoarding a secret paper-making formula and cutting his brothers out of the profits. Cheng Yaojin had no idea what he was talking about and nearly exploded. He swore on his honor he'd never seen the magazine before today. Qin Xiong, the eldest of the 3 and too sick from old battle wounds to stand, calmed them down. Cheng Yaojin pulled out the stack of invitation cards he'd been receiving, dozens of them, all asking about Jin. He finally looked at the magazine in his hands, and it dawned on him. All his headaches these past 2 days were because of a few sheets of paper. At Qin Xiong's mansion, the 3 old war buddies kept arguing about who was behind my magazine. Su Shiji pointed out that even if Cheng Yaojin truly knew nothing, the connection to Yuqi was real. His own household servants had confirmed it. He asked Cheng Yaojin directly whether his stepdaughter could really have the ability to make paper and publish books on her own. Cheng Yaojin spat on the floor in frustration. He said his stepdaughter only knew how to eat and had zero talent for anything like paper making. If she could make paper, he would not have needed to borrow money from his brothers to fund that saltpeter mining operation in Sichuan. Su Shiji dodged the spit and fired back that Yuqi avoided her stepfather because he was ugly and had no idea how to treat people with warmth. That stung, but Cheng Yaojin could not really argue. Qin Xiong, always the calm one despite his deteriorating health, steered the conversation back to what mattered. He explained that the whole capital was buzzing with rumors that Cheng Yaojin had stumbled onto a secret paper-making formula. The noble clans who had been sitting on the fence were now starting to pay attention. Qin Xiong had hoped this was their chance to challenge the old aristocratic families who monopolized education and talent through their control of paper and books. Cheap paper meant cheap books, and cheap books meant ordinary people could finally study and compete with the elite. It would break the stranglehold that the 5 great surnames and 7 noble clans held over the empire. Su Shiji agreed completely. Even if Cheng Yaojin was not the source, the paper was real and someone was making it. If they could find that person and form an alliance, the new nobility that had risen alongside Li Shimin would finally have a weapon against the old guard. The opportunity was too important to ignore. Cheng Yaojin calmed down enough to think clearly. He admitted he had only been home from the frontier for a few days and had a mountain of household business to deal with. He barely saw Yuqi because the girl stuck close to her mother, the Lady Cui, and avoided him like he was a ghost. But he understood the stakes now. He would go home and question Yuqi about who was really behind the paper. If there truly was a paper-making formula out there, They needed to act fast before the old clans got their hands on it first. Qin Xiong and Su Shiji both nodded. This was potentially the biggest breakthrough for their faction since the founding of the dynasty. Cheng Yaojin left the mansion with purpose in his step for the first time in days. But while those three were scheming in Chang'an, trouble found me back in the village. It happened about half an hour before Cheng Yaojin walked out of Qin Xiong's gate. I had been doing my morning routine, checking on the new bakery workshop after breakfast. I take food safety seriously. Coming from the 21st century, I cannot stomach the idea of someone getting sick from something I made. The bakery was a recent addition to our operations. After Constable Chui tasted our steamed buns and flour rolls, he started ordering those too. The bakery alone was pulling in 20,000 coins a day, with a net profit of about 12,000. That works out to 360 strings of copper per month. Insane margins. I had separated the bakery from the main kitchen, so Ugly Auntie would not lose her mind trying to manage everything. The new bakery manager was Annie Zhou, wife of the former village chief. Everything ran smoothly for 2 days. Then the county magistrate showed up. His name was Lu Yu, a minor branch member of the Fanyang Lu clan, one of the 7 great noble families. The moment I heard his name, I knew this was just a throwaway villain. The kind of character who exists in stories to give the hero experience points and loot. So I was not exactly polite about the whole situation, especially since the man had the nerve to come bully us at our own doorstep. His method was clever, though. He used the excuse of public unrest during turbulent times and accused our village of illegal assembly. Then his men took away all 20 outside workers from the bakery. Every single one. They did not smash anything or steal goods. They just removed the people who knew how to run the operation. I sent my brother to fetch Constable Chui immediately, but by the time Chui arrived, the magistrate's people were long gone. Chui explained what Lu Yu was really after. It was not about public order. It was about stealing our recipes. The magistrate wanted to learn how we made our bread products. That was why he only took the bakery workers and left the pottery and construction crews alone. Those 20 workers had handled every step of the process. With them, Lu Yu could reproduce everything we made. Constable Chui admitted he had considered the same scheme himself early on, but was too honorable to go through with it. He warned me that fighting officials was dangerous. If we had resisted more forcefully during the raid, the magistrate's men might have actually killed us. That was just how things worked in this era. A county official could get away with murder if he wanted to. But I could not help laughing. Ugly Auntie and Aunt Hua laughed too. Constable Chui looked at us like we had lost our minds. He thought the magistrate had successfully stolen our secret and warned me not to go crazy over it. What he did not understand was that the key ingredient, the yeast that makes bread rise and become soft, exists nowhere in the entire Tang dynasty except in my possession. Those workers could demonstrate every step perfectly and still produce nothing but flat, hard lumps. The magistrate had stolen an empty box. Still, Chui's warning about violence sobered me up fast. I had not realized how ruthless even a minor official could be this close to the capital. If things were this bad near Chang'an, the countryside must be far worse. My brother put his hand on my shoulder and gave me a serious look. The villagers and my mother all stared at me nervously, probably worried I would pull out my gun and go shoot the magistrate dead. I was not that stupid. Killing an official would turn me into a fugitive. What was I going to do then? Become king of the bandits? I told my brother to relax, but I also made it clear that I refused to just swallow this loss. If the magistrate dared to come after us once, he would dare to come again. We needed a plan to make sure that never happened. The county magistrate Lu Yu turned out to be just a puppet. After he grabbed my 20 bakery workers, he did not take them to the Lu family estate. Instead, he delivered them straight to a manor belonging to the Taiyuan Wang clan. The real person behind everything was Wang Yuan, the man who controls all Wang family business in Wanyan County. Lu Yu is his nephew. His mother is Wang Yuan's own sister. The county magistrate position was a gift that Wang Yuan arranged for him after the previous magistrate died during the Turkic invasion. Lu Yu wants to prove himself worthy of entering the main family records, so he does whatever his uncle tells him without question. Wang Yuan had a careful plan. He knew going after my gray paper formula directly would be too risky. If I really had connections to the Wei family, the Chung family, and the imperial household, then attacking the paper business could destroy everything Wang Yuan had built over the years. So he chose a softer target first. He wanted to steal my bread recipes and use that as leverage to pressure me. His thinking was that if I felt threatened, I would run to my powerful backers for help, and then he could observe who those backers actually were. It was a test, not a killing blow. But half a day later, Wang Yuan's plan fell apart completely. His people made those 20 workers repeat every single step of the baking process over and over again. They tried more than 10 times. Every batch came out terrible. The buns were worse than ordinary steamed cakes. His manager came back with the bad news, trembling with fear. Wang Yuan could not understand how this was possible. His nephew had confirmed that these 20 workers handled every part of the bakery operation. There should have been no missing piece. But the manager remembered something. One of the workers who mixed the dough had mentioned that the flour in our village was whiter than normal flour. And the water used for mixing was not plain water either. It was some kind of special liquid. Wang Yuan slammed his fist on the table. The real secret was in the flour and the mixing water all along. I had been prepared for exactly this kind of theft. The truth is even simpler than what Wang Yuan guessed. The yeast I used to make bread rise does not exist anywhere in the Tang dynasty. Without it, flour is just flour and water is just water. You can follow every step perfectly and still end up with flat, hard lumps. Those workers never even knew about the yeast because I always added it myself or through people I trusted completely. After calming down, Wang Yuan changed his approach. He told his manager to go by the recipe directly, using a personal identity so it could not be traced back to the Wang family. When the manager asked about the budget, Wang Yuan told him not to worry about money. He said to handle it the way they always handle things, as long as nobody ends up dead. The manager grinned and left eagerly. The moment the door closed behind him, Wang Yuan opened his eyes and sighed. He muttered that he had just lost another obedient dog. I think he meant the manager was walking into a trap and would not be coming back in one piece. Back in the village, I was not sitting around feeling sorry for myself. I had Constable Cui bring in 20 replacement workers right away. I was feeling confident. I thought to myself that I was the chosen one of this world and nobody could scare me. I was ready to shout something dramatic about bringing on whatever challenges they had. Then the children came running into the village, crying and screaming. Dainyu and Erguzi were at the front, tears and snot covering their faces. They were sobbing so hard they could barely get the words out. They said their leader had been grabbed. Bad people had taken her away. I froze for a moment before I realized who their leader was. It was my little sister, Ruhui. She is only 4.5 years old. The kids had been playing by the creek when several men burst out of the forest. They kicked Dainyu aside and snatched my sister. Erguzi said she bit one of the men, so the man hit her, and she closed her eyes and went quiet. He asked me through his tears if his little Annie was dead. My blood went cold. Second grandpa rushed over and I told him to gather every single villager on the East Hill immediately and do a head count to see if anyone else was missing. My brother Junmai came sprinting over. When he heard the children repeat what happened, the veins on his forehead looked ready to burst. I grabbed his arm and told him to go to the horse field and wait for me. I needed to run home first. I promised him our sister would be fine. He trusted me enough to listen, but I could see the rage barely contained behind his eyes. I ran home as fast as my legs could carry me. All I could think about was that sticky little girl who always clung to me. She is 4 years old. She did nothing wrong. Whatever grudge these people have is with me, not with a child who still calls pretty visitors fairy sisters. I bit my lip so hard it bled. The pain sharpened my focus. Under my bed, I found a small box about the size of a phone. Inside was a tracking device I had bought from the light screen a while back, just as a precaution. I never expected to actually need it. I pressed the power button and the dark screen lit up with a coordinate grid. 3 dots blinked in the center area. The middle one was me. The left, that was my mother. The right one was my brother. Each of us wears a pendant on a cord around our neck. Mine is a snake for my zodiac sign. My brother wears a tiger. My sister wears a rabbit. The pendants are signal transmitters. I zoomed out on the screen and found a 4th dot. It was moving north, not very fast, but it was already near the edge of the tracker's 5-kilometer range. Without satellite support, that is as far as the device can detect. I kicked off my straw sandals and pulled on my cloth shoes. Then I dragged a wooden chest out from under the bed. Inside were 2 weapons. A titanium alloy combat knife I had bought the first time I faced the Turks, and an Uzi submachine gun I had bought the second time. My light screen popped up showing my balance at 252,000 yuan. 9mm bullets cost 20 yuan each. I started buying. Buy, 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 buy. I was done being careful. Someone took my little sister. Someone was going to pay for that with everything they had. It was deep autumn and the forests were turning yellow and brown. Leaves fell from the bushes at the slightest touch. My brother and I rode north toward Jingyang County, passing the hillside where I had killed those Turkic soldiers for the first time, and then the valley where I had pretended to be a merchant. This was the farthest I had ever been from the village, but I had no interest in the scenery. All I could think about was my little sister. The tracker in my hand beeped steadily. We were getting closer. When we reached about 1,000 meters from her signal, the alarm started going off. I tightened my grip on the Uzi at my waist and told my brother they had stopped moving. They were probably resting somewhere up ahead. My brother nodded. He could not understand the device I was holding, but he trusted me completely. We tied our horses to a tree and continued on foot to avoid alerting anyone. Before we moved, my brother made one thing clear. He would go in first. I could only use my weapon after he confirmed our sister was safe. I agreed without argument. I had no skill with precise shooting anyway. Spraying bullets near a 4-year-old girl was not something I was willing to risk. We crept through the forest using the shadows of the trees as cover. I was gasping for breath trying to keep up with my brother, but I refused to slow down. Every second mattered. Within minutes we reached the location, but what we found was not a group of bandits sitting around a campfire. It was a large estate, a wealthy family's compound with high walls and solid gates. My brother froze and gripped his sword tighter. He recognized the place. It was the Wong family manor. I asked him how he knew, and he just shook his head. He told me we had a problem. Even if we fought, 10 of him could not break into this place. There were at least 100 guards inside. I pointed out that the county magistrate's surname was Liu, not Wong. My brother said quietly that this meant more than one group of powerful people was targeting us. The magistrate Liu Yu and the Wong clan were working together. Cold sweat ran down my back. I squeezed the Uzi harder to steady my nerves. I told my brother it did not matter who was behind this. Our sister could not be harmed no matter what. He agreed with a single firm nod. Inside the manor, things were not as organized as I had feared. The Wong family steward was angry at the men who had brought my sister there. He told them to throw the unconscious girl into the storage room before the lady of the house saw her. Apparently, the mistress of the estate despised this kind of dirty business. The leader of the kidnappers, a big man with a thick beard, was upset too. He told the steward that grabbing someone from Shago village was asking for trouble. He said he had repaid his debt and wanted nothing more to do with the steward ever again. Then he took his men and disappeared through the back gate on horseback. The steward did not understand what the big man meant about our village being dangerous. He just snorted, locked the storage room, and walked away toward the front courtyard. At least the bearded man had been careful enough to lay my sister down gently in a wooden crate inside the storage room. Small mercy from a kidnapper. We waited until midnight. The estate was dark and silent. My brother and I moved through the grass like shadows until we reached a large tree near the back wall. I checked the tracker one more time. My sister's signal was coming from just 7 or 8 meters past the back gate. My brother did not understand meters, so I converted it for him. About 2 zhang. Very close. He went first, sprinting low to the wall and leaping up to the top in one smooth motion. When I ran over, he reached down with both hands and pulled me up like I weighed nothing. We crouched on the wall and looked around. The back courtyard was completely empty. No guards, no patrols, no lanterns. I was confused. In every drama I had watched, rich estates had tight security everywhere. My brother explained simply that the Wong clan status was so high that nobody in the area would dare rob them. They did not need heavy security because their name alone was their protection. We dropped down into the courtyard. I followed the tracker signal to a wooden door in the northeast corner. My brother whispered asking if she was inside. I nodded and told him to open it and find out. I quickly purchased a pair of bolt cutters from my light screen. The lock on the door was pathetically weak. One squeeze and it snapped clean off. I pushed the door open slowly, trying not to make any noise. I pulled out my lighter and flicked it on. The small flame lit up the dark room, and the first thing I saw was my little sister lying on top of a wooden crate. She was still unconscious. I rushed over and scooped her up, checking her body for injuries. I found a large bump on the back of her head where someone had hit her. Rage burned through me. She is 4 years old. What kind of animal hits a 4-year-old child on the head hard enough to knock her out? I kissed her forehead and turned to leave immediately. But then my light screen started flashing wildly in the darkness. It had detected valuable items in the storage room. 329 gene of raw Hetian jade, worth 1,720,000 yuan, and a 300-year-old wild ginseng root, worth 1,200,000 yuan. Combined, nearly 3 million yuan sitting right there in the Wang family storage room alongside my kidnapped sister. My brother pushed my shoulder and hissed at me to move. He thought I had frozen up from fear. I looked at his face in the darkness, grinned, and said, "Yes, let us go right now." I silently collected both treasures through my light screen. My balance jumped from 250,000 to over 3 million yuan in an instant. Nobody saw anything. Nobody heard anything. The jade and ginseng simply vanished from their spots in the dark storage room. By the time the Wang family discovered the loss, they would have no idea what happened. We climbed back over the wall, ran through the forest, untied our horses, and rode south toward home as fast as we could. My sister stayed asleep in my arms the entire way, breathing softly against my chest. I kept my light screen closed and held her tighter. Stay low and stay quiet. We had rescued my sister and accidentally robbed one of the most powerful families in the region. Tonight was a good night. We got back to the village late that night. It was not long before my little sister woke up. The first thing she said was that she was hungry and her tummy was flat and sad. I reached over and gently touched the bump on the back of her head. She scrunched up her little eyebrows, and then her lip started trembling. She wailed that it did not hurt before, but the moment I touched it, now it hurt. Classic little kid logic. After calming her down, I asked her what happened. She told me everything in her own simple way. She saw some bad men come out of the trees. A big one with a beard tried to grab her. She bit him. Then everything went dark. My mother listened carefully and nodded with relief. The girl seemed perfectly normal, no signs of lasting trauma. At least we did not have to worry about her losing her mind from the experience. That was the best outcome we could hope for given the circumstances. I bought a pile of cakes and candy from my light screen and gave them all to her. The moment she had sweets in her hands, she bounced right back to her usual cheerful self. Watching her stuff her face with sugar and cream made some of the guilt in my chest ease up. Kids are amazing that way. The pain ends the moment something sweet shows up. Later, my brother and I sat in the courtyard drinking fruit wine. I closed my light screen and took a deep breath. My balance had jumped past 3 million yuan overnight, thanks to the jade and ginseng I collected from the Wang family's storage room. I still could not wrap my head around suddenly being this rich. I had no idea what to spend it on. Then a thought hit me. I turned to my brother and said we needed to build our own fighting force. He looked at me with surprise. I explained that today's kidnapping could happen again. If we had people secretly guarding the village and protecting everyone around the clock, we would never be caught off guard like this again. He asked if I meant hiring bodyguards. I said no. Hired guards could not be fully trusted. Sixth uncle had told me there were slave markets in the county and in Chang'an. I wanted to buy orphan children and raise them as our own loyal soldiers. This idea had been brewing in my mind for a while. Anyone trying to grow a business in this era was going to attract enemies. Having my own armed force would be the fangs I needed to survive in the Tang dynasty. People might not intend to harm a tiger, but the tiger always has the will to harm people. My brother stared at me for a long moment. Then he drained his wine cup in one gulp and said just 2 words. Do it. The next morning at the Wang family manor, the steward went absolutely berserk. He smashed everything on his desk and then started slapping his head guard across the face. Over 100 guards in the estate, and somehow someone had snuck in overnight and taken the girl right out of the storage room. The guard tried to suggest going to our village openly to take her back, but the steward slapped him 3 more times for that stupid idea. If they marched in publicly, the whole world would know the Taiyuan Wang clan was bullying a small village. The steward's career would be finished, and possibly his life too. He ordered everyone to keep their mouths shut. Under no circumstances could Wang Yuan find out what happened. Then he told the guards to load several crates of jade rough stones onto carts and deliver them to Chang'an for an important event the next day. I had to suppress a laugh when I heard about this later. Those jade crates were going to be a lot lighter than the steward expected. 329 gene of raw Hetian jade had already been recycled through my light screen the night before. Back at the village, I watched my sister running around with the other kids like nothing had happened. Good as new. That is the beauty of being 4 years old. The scar heals, and the memory fades before lunch. Sun Feng showed up that afternoon with a letter for me. He said it came from the Chung family estate, and he had been told to deliver it personally into my hands. He poured himself a cup of fruit wine and started munching on spicy dried fish while I opened the letter. He pretended to be casual, but I could tell he was watching my face closely. The whole capital was buzzing with rumors that General Qing Yaojin was behind my magazine, and Sun Feng wanted to figure out the truth. I read the letter and smiled. It was from Yuchi. She was inviting me to attend the grand opening of the Chung family's new restaurant in Chang'an, a place called Drunken Immortal House. I asked Sun Feng how far Chang'an was from our village. He said about 20-some li, less than 1 hour by fast horse, and under 2 hours by carriage. Sun Feng explained the background of the restaurant. It used to belong to the former Crown Prince's faction. After the Xuanwu Gate incident, Emperor Li Shimin redistributed the seized properties among his supporters. Chung Yaojin received half a street in the East Market, the most valuable commercial district in the entire capital. Half a street might not sound like much, but a single shop there was worth a fortune. Then Sun Feng mentioned something that caught my attention. The Chung family's Drunken Immortal House sat on the south side of Sun Street. Directly across from it, on the north side of Kent Street, was a restaurant called Cloud Joy Tower, owned by the Wang family. And that Wang restaurant was also holding its grand opening on the exact same day. It was obviously a deliberate provocation. Wang Yuan was trying to steal the spotlight from Chung Yaojin's big day by staging a competing event right across the street. I crossed my right leg over my left and bounced it up and down, thinking this through. No wonder Yuchi had written to me. She was not just being friendly. She wanted my cooking to help make their restaurant launch a success against the Wang family's challenge. A restaurant business was definitely profitable, and if the Wang clan was involved, this was personal for me too. They were the ones who had my sister kidnapped. They were the ones pulling the county magistrate's strings. Now they were picking a fight with the Chung family right out in the open. I took a sip of wine and grinned. This trip to Chang'an was going to be very interesting. The next morning, my brother and I stood at the village entrance dressed in proper Tang Dynasty clothing. I was not about to walk into Chang'an wearing my usual flower shirt and beach shorts. I spent 1,200 yuan on a Daoist robe from my light screen, the same style as Li Bai from that TV show about Chang'an. For my brother, I bought a fancier outfit for 1,500 yuan, matching the style of Zhang Xiaojing from the same show. We looked like proper gentlemen for the first time since I arrived in this era. Behind us, Sixth Uncle and his construction crew were ready to head into the city too. Wei Zhang's steward had been nagging them twice already about the public toilet project. Since we were all going the same direction, we traveled together. The materials were prepared, and the job would only take about 2 days to finish. For village security while we were gone, I spent 10 strings of copper to hire 10 retired postal workers through Constable Chui. These were men with some martial arts training, the kind called undesirables, in this era. My brother approved each one. They would guard the village at 1 string of copper per person until we returned. Saying goodbye to my mother was painful. She stood by the carriage holding my little sister, repeating her warnings over and over until I told her she had said the same things 800 times already. She should just come with us if she was that worried. But she could not leave. Someone had to watch over all our workshops and businesses. My sister had tried desperately to come along. The moment she heard the word Chang'an, she climbed onto my neck and refused to let go. My mother pinched her bottom until it bruised, but the little monkey would not release her grip. Finally, my mother pretended to agree, telling her she could go. My sister started crying from the pain in her backside and exhausted herself so completely that she fell asleep in my arms. Then my mother snatched her back like the sneaky woman she is. I finally understood where my sister learned her stubborn personality. Like mother, like daughter. The real reason my mother was so anxious was my father. He had left for Chang'an too, and 3 years later he still had not come home. She had sent people to search for him. My brother had gone looking countless times. Nothing. She was terrified of losing another family member to that city. She bit her lip to hold back tears as our carriage disappeared into the forest. I pretended not to notice. The journey from our village to Chang'an is about 20-some li. We had to cross the river twice by ferry. The old boatman charged 15 coins for our entire group of nearly 20 people and 3 horse carts. I had no idea how the old man made a living on such tiny fees. I spent the ride thinking about building a bridge someday and figuring out what these ferry workers would do for income if I did. There was nothing much to see along the way. Once we crossed the Jing River, the landscape turned into a flat plain. All the trees had been cut down years ago to build houses in the capital or to make charcoal. The ground was covered with old stumps poking out of the grass. Not exactly scenic. But then the city walls appeared in the distance, and I could not look away. I counted 6 gates along the northern wall, though not all of them were open. The walls stood 12 meters tall and stretched endlessly in both directions. This was Chang'an, the greatest city in the world. It had not yet reached its peak glory, but even now it radiated power and grandeur that took my breath away. My brother steered us east along the wall. We circled around the northeast corner of the city, then rode south along the eastern wall for another kilometer before reaching the Spring Brightness Gate. The old saying about mountains looking close but taking forever to reach applies perfectly to city walls too. Just as we approached the gate, my brother made a surprised sound. I peeked through the carriage curtain and saw a dark-skinned young man leaning against the gate frame, watching the crowd with a bored expression. It was Chung Chumu, Yuchi's older brother. The same guy we met when he came to buy horses from us. The Chung family had split up gate duty among the brothers to welcome important guests for today's restaurant opening. Chumu had drawn the east gate because it offered the shortest route to the restaurant. He clearly was not thrilled about the assignment until our eyes met through the carriage window. I smiled and asked if he remembered me. He glanced at my brother and spotted the leopard skin-wrapped handle of Frost Sorrow on his back. His eyebrows went up. Of course he remembered. I handed him Yuchi's letter. He read it quickly, took a deep breath, and forced a smile onto his dark face. Since his little sister had invited us personally, he would escort us inside himself. Without waiting for a response, Chumu jumped onto the carriage next to my brother and pointed forward. He said the timing was perfect because it was breakfast time and we could sample his family restaurant's cooking. My brother looked back at me. We shrugged at each other and let him lead the way. Once inside the city, my eyes went into overload mode. The streets were not as chaotic as I had imagined from paintings like the famous Riverside Scroll. The Tang Dynasty had excellent traffic management. There were dedicated lanes for horse carts separated from pedestrian paths. The roads were wide enough that even without being one-way streets, there was no congestion. Armed patrolmen walked along both sides keeping order. We stopped at a carriage house where Chumu told a servant to park our vehicles and feed our horses the best feed available. The servant handed my brother a wooden token for claiming the carriage later. I stared in amazement. This was basically a parking garage and gas station combined, Tang Dynasty style. The Chung family owned it too. Everything about this city ran on systems I had not expected. After we parked, I told Sixth Uncle to head to the Wei Mansion for his construction project. He had an invitation letter with all the details about the toilet renovation job. All government construction in Chang'an required official permits and paperwork, so the letter covered everything he needed. Chumu overheard and helpfully pointed out that the Wei residence was in Chongren district, less than 100 paces ahead. Sixth Uncle just needed to mention the Wei family name at the district gate, and someone would guide him there. With that settled, my brother and I followed Chuma deeper into the greatest city on earth. Breakfast was waiting, and so was a restaurant war between the Chung family and the Wang clan. I had a feeling this day was going to be memorable. We said goodbye to Sixth Uncle after agreeing to meet at the carriage house tomorrow at noon, then followed Chung Chumu through the streets toward the East Market. The main roads of Chang'an were impressively wide, but once we turned onto Sun South Street, the roads narrowed to about 4 lanes wide. Both sides were lined with shops and small stalls selling all kinds of goods. Even coming from the future, I felt the urge to stop and browse. The variety was genuinely impressive for this era. With Chumu bulldozing through the crowd ahead of us, we reached the drunken Immortal House quickly. But my attention was immediately pulled across the street to the Cloud Joy Tower. That place was packed with customers streaming in and out. Banners covered its front wall, each one bearing congratulatory messages from important people. The names on those banners were clearly not ordinary folk. Chumu spat toward the rival restaurant and cursed under his breath. He explained that the Wang family had deliberately timed their reopening to clash with today's launch, purely to humiliate the Chung family. A cold thought flickered through my mind. The Wang family. The same clan whose manor had held my kidnapped sister just days ago. I hoped this was the same group. If so, fate had handed me a perfect excuse to settle that score publicly. I would love nothing more than to embarrass them right back for what they did to my little sister. Looking at the two restaurants side by side, their buildings were similar in size and quality. But the difference in atmosphere was painfully obvious. Cloud Joy Tower was draped in decorations and buzzing with energy. Drunken Immortal House had nothing but a signboard above the door. No banners, no decorations, no crowd. It looked abandoned by comparison. Chumu noticed me studying the competition and got annoyed. He huffed and marched inside without waiting for us. My brother nudged me forward and we followed him in. The ground floor was nicely arranged, half traditional floor seating and half raised tables with stools. Big windows let in plenty of light. It would have been a pleasant space if it were not almost completely empty. The second floor had a scattering of guests chatting in small groups. Some stood by the windows staring across at Cloud Joy Tower and commenting on how well it was doing. When they saw Chumu come up, everyone bowed respectfully. These were obviously minor figures who had come to show face, not anyone with real influence. No powerful person would bow that eagerly to a general's son. Chumu kept walking straight up to the third floor. The moment we reached the top of the stairs, I heard crying. A girl's soft sobbing echoed down the hallway. Chumu's face changed instantly, and he sprinted toward a private room at the end of the corridor, shouting and asking who had bullied his little sister. I recognized that voice right away. It was Yuchi. I walked quickly to the doorway and peeked inside. She was sitting in a chair surrounded by a pile of invitation reply cards. A young maid was dabbing at her tears with a cloth. Yuchi's shoulders were shaking with each sob. The sight twisted something in my chest. The maid spotted me lurking at the door first and demanded to know who I was. Then Yuchi turned around and our eyes met. She called my name. I called hers. Then there was an awkward silence that lasted about 1 incense stick's worth of time while they shuffled us properly into the room. When we came back in, Yuchi had fixed her makeup, but her big round eyes were still red and puffy. I skipped all the pleasantries and asked her directly who had made her cry. Chumu looked like he wanted to say something but could not find the words, so he just stared at his sister too, waiting. Yuchi blushed furiously and stared at her sleeves without speaking. Her maid jumped in and explained everything with righteous indignation. The story was simple. Yuchi had learned cooking techniques from me and taught them to the restaurant's kitchen staff. She wanted to use those skills to make the Drunken Immortal House a success. She had personally written invitation cards to all her friends, mostly daughters from noble families she had grown up with as part of the Chui clan circle. Every single one of them declined. The pile of cards on the table were all rejections. The same polite excuse repeated over and over. Cannot attend. The Cloud Joy Tower across the street had stolen all potential customers with superior attractions, and the noble families did not want to be seen supporting the Chung family against the Wang clan. Yuchi had never been rejected like this before in her life. She grew up among these people. They were her childhood friends, her cousins, her social world. She did not understand that the political war between old and new nobility had made her friendships meaningless. I wanted to tell her she was naive for not seeing this coming. Her stepfather Cheng Yaojin was openly fighting the old aristocratic clans. Of course their daughters would not show up at his restaurant. But I held my tongue. This girl was not Cheng Yaojin's blood daughter. She had been raised entirely in the world of the old nobility through her mother's Chui family connections. She simply did not know that the rules had changed around her. I told her to stop crying over fake friends. If they could abandon her this easily, they were never worth keeping. I reached out to pat her head, but Chumu slapped my hand away hard and told me to keep my hands to myself. I rubbed my wrist and decided this man had no concept of appropriate force. Yuchi shyly asked if I had eaten breakfast yet and offered to let me try the kitchen's cooking. She said she had taught them everything I showed her, and the food was nearly as good as mine. I agreed happily and said I was starving. Then I asked about the opening ceremony. Where were the festivities and the promotional events? Everyone stared at me blankly. Chumu snapped that opening a business just meant opening the doors. What else would you do? I struggled to explain the concept of a grand opening with attractions to draw customers. Yuchi's face fell further. She said they had considered doing something special, but the competition across the street had a promotion they could not match. She did not want to embarrass the family by trying and failing publicly. I pushed past Chumu to the window and looked down at Cloud Joy Tower's entrance. 2 long tables sat outside with 20 large stones displayed on top. Chumu explained they were raw jade stones from the kingdom of Gaochong. purchased at great expense by Wang Yuan. Any customer who spent 50 strings of copper or more could pick a stone and have it cut open on the spot. Each stone was guaranteed to contain jade inside, though the size and quality varied wildly. The gambling element made it irresistible. That was why every wealthy person in the district was lining up across the street instead of coming here. I stared at those 20 stones and a grin spread across my face. I turned back to look at Yuchi's sad, beautiful face and felt something shift inside me. I said quietly that I had not planned on making a scene today, but I simply could not stand watching her be this unhappy. I needed a promotional stunt to compete with Cloud Joy Tower across the street. My first thoughts were classic ideas like poetry contests, couplet challenges, or lantern riddles. But with everyone staring at me expectantly, I could not exactly pull out a book of stolen Tang Dynasty poems and start plagiarizing. So I went with something from my own world that nobody in this era could possibly know about. Sudoku. I told Shimu to go buy a large red cloth about 1 zhang square and prepare some paper and ink. I accidentally called him big brother-in-law while giving orders. Both he and Yuchi immediately objected, though their reactions could not have been more different. Shimu looked ready to murder me. Yuchi turned red as a cherry and stared at the floor. Her little maid Xiaohuan glanced between us, figured out what was going on faster than anyone, and cheerfully called me young master son-in-law before skipping out to fetch the supplies. I nodded approvingly at her retreating figure and declared her a quick learner. Yuchi squeaked something about me being improper and fled to the back room to hide. Shimu warned me through gritted teeth that if my plan failed, he would not be polite about it. My brother stepped forward to stand behind me, silently communicating that while his little brother might be an idiot, he was still off limits. Shimu glared at my brother, snorted, and sat back down. The tension was almost funny. While waiting for supplies, I looked down at the 20 jade stones displayed in front of Cloud Joy Tower. A wicked thought crossed my mind. I wondered if my light screen could recycle those stones from this distance. Maybe I could drain their entire promotion without leaving the building. I muttered something about it being possible, and my brother caught my scheming expression and asked what I was talking about. I waved him off and changed the subject. I confirmed with him that the Cloud Joy Tower and the Wang family manor where they held my sister were connected to the same person. He nodded. The manor belonged to the Wang clan's chief manager in Chang'an, and this restaurant was another one of his properties. I smiled coldly. Good. If they were all the same group, then today would be a down payment on the debt they owed for hurting my little sister. Anyone who touches her does not get to walk away without losing some skin. Half an hour later, everything was ready. My brother and Shimu climbed onto the roof of Drunken Immortal House, carrying the huge red cloth. They tied one end to the eaves and waited for my signal. Down below, the old manager of our restaurant banged a copper gong and started shouting to the crowd. He called out that there was a 10,000 string reward waiting for whoever could claim it. Come inside and see for yourselves. The 2 men on the roof released the cloth. It unfurled dramatically down the front of the building, covering about a third of the 3rd floor's street-facing wall. The red fabric was enormous, over 3 meters on each side. On it I had painted a giant Sudoku puzzle. The design was a 9x9 grid divided into 9 smaller boxes, each containing its own 3x3 grid. I had filled in just 2 numbers per small box, leaving the rest blank. The bottom 3 rows were covered with black cloth, hidden from view. Below the visible portion, I had written the rules in neat regular script along with the prize. The rules were straightforward. Each small 3x3 box must contain the numbers 1 through 9 without repeating. Each row across the full grid must also contain 1 through 9 without repeating. Same for each column going down. Simple to understand. Nearly impossible to solve at this difficulty level. The prize was what set the street on fire. I had written it clearly for everyone to read. 1 complete land deed for the Chung family estate outside the city, valued at 10,000 strings of copper, including ownership rights over 700 households of estate workers. The crowd exploded. People were shouting and pointing. Some doubted whether the prize was real. Others pointed out that Chung Chumu himself had hung the banner, so the Chung family was clearly backing it. Someone else noted that the Wang clan was watching from across the street, which meant the Chung family could not possibly cheat without losing tremendous face. The logic was sound. This was legitimate. The entry requirement was simple. Spend 10 strings of copper on food and drink at Drunken Immortal House. In return, you receive a copy of the complete puzzle, including the hidden bottom rows. You then have half an hour to solve it. If you succeed, the land deed is yours. If you fail, well, you still had a nice meal. 10 strings of copper for a chance at 10,000 strings was 1,000 to 1 return. Nobody could resist those odds. The noble family sons who had been lining up at Cloud Joy Tower started flooding across the street toward us. These were exactly the people I wanted. World family scions hoping to win a Chung family estate would be the ultimate trophy to bring home to their clan elders. Imagine telling your family patriarch that you won a piece of enemy territory through nothing but your intellect. That kind of achievement could transform a minor branch member's entire career. Within minutes, Drunken Immortal House was packed. The old manager scrambled to organize his staff as customers poured through the doors, all demanding 10 strings worth of food and a copy of the puzzle immediately. Some did not even care about the food. They threw down their silver and asked for the puzzle sheet before the wine arrived. Up on the 3rd floor, Yuchi pressed her face against the window and watched the crowd below with her mouth hanging open. She turned to look at me with pure adoration in her eyes, unable to believe what was happening. I leaned against the window frame trying to look cool and winked at her. She squealed and looked away, then immediately looked back down at the growing mob rushing into our restaurant. I chuckled and stopped teasing her. I looked across at Cloud Joy Tower instead. People were pouring out of their doors, abandoning their meals to come examine our giant red banner. I was not worried about anyone solving the puzzle. This particular Sudoku was a nightmare difficulty level. Back in my previous life, it had taken me an entire night and more than a dozen sheets of scratch paper to crack it. These ancient scholars had never even seen the concept before. They would burn through their half hour without getting close. I watched the Cloud Joy Tower's jade stone display sitting unattended as their customers abandoned them for our restaurant. Then I turned to Yuchi with a grin and suggested that the poor Cloud Joy Tower looked awfully lonely over there. Maybe we should go across the street and help boost their traffic a little. After all, it would be rude not to visit our neighbors on their opening day. Yuchi trusted me completely now. When I suggested visiting Cloud Joy Tower across the street, she did not even question it. She figured it was just being neighborly, the polite thing to do between shops on the same street. On our way downstairs, we passed through the 2nd floor. Every single table was occupied by young nobles and old scholars hunched over their Sudoku puzzles. Some had brought their own scratch paper and were chewing on their brushes, deep in thought. The study atmosphere was so intense it felt like an exam hall. I had to smile at that. These people had never encountered anything like this puzzle before, and they were completely hooked. The 1st floor was even crazier. The place was packed wall to wall with people. Chumu had organized the family servants into a security team, controlling the flow of customers coming in and going out. Many people did not even bother sitting at proper tables. They paid their 10 strings of copper, grabbed the puzzle sheet, and sat right on the floor to start calculating. I saw plenty of head scratching and ear pulling going on. Nobody was getting close to solving it. My brother was standing guard at the staircase. When he saw Yuchi and me coming down, he nodded politely to her and then told me my plan was actually working. He estimated that in just the last half hour, nearly 100 people had purchased puzzle sheets at 10 strings each. That was already 1,000 strings of copper in revenue. I was not surprised. 10 strings might sound like a lot back in our village, but here in Chang'an, it was pocket change for these wealthy families. It was basically the price of one evening at a fancy brothel. These people did not care about the entry fee at all. Chumu pushed through the crowd to reach us. He was holding an account book and his attitude toward me had completely changed. He no longer looked at me like I was an annoying pest. He showed Yuchi the numbers. 132 paying customers so far, filling every seat on both floors. There were still people lined up outside waiting to get in, but they had to wait for the current round's time limit to expire first. Right on cue, a commotion broke out in the main hall. Someone's half hour had run out, and another customer was trying to physically drag him off his seat. The man being kicked out protested loudly, claiming he was moments away from cracking the puzzle. The one doing the kicking was a young noble surnamed Wang. He demanded that Chumu enforce the time limit. Chuma handled it smoothly. He told the Wang kid to calm down. Yes, the time limit for the challenge was half an hour, but this was still a restaurant. The failed challenger had paid for food and drink, so he had every right to sit and enjoy his meal. A waiter walked over and placed a red wooden sign on the table reading, "Challenge failed." Chimu announced loudly that once the timer expired, you could keep eating and even keep working on the puzzle, but your result would not count. Failure was failure. The failed challenger was bitter, but accepted it. He shot the Wong kid a cold look and declared he planned to enjoy his expensive meal for at least another hour or two. The Wong noble stormed toward the exit, shouting as he left that the whole thing was probably a scam. He claimed the puzzle had no solution and everyone inside was a fool for falling for it. Chimu nearly exploded at the insult, but I grabbed his arm and stopped him. I had a better idea. I walked over to the failed challenger and politely asked to see his puzzle sheet. He was annoyed at being interrupted again, but when he looked up and saw a young man in a Taoist robe, he calmed down. He asked if I wanted his seat too. I laughed and told him I had noticed he was remarkably close to solving the puzzle. He only had 11 squares left. Since the Wong kid had just accused us of fraud, I wanted to use this gentleman's nearly completed sheet to prove the puzzle was solvable. The Wong noble came back, curious despite himself. Everyone in the hall stopped what they were doing to watch. The Wong kid snatched the sheet from my hands and confirmed there were indeed only 11 empty squares. He challenged me to fill them in. If I could not, it would prove the restaurant was cheating. Chuma shoved him aside and brought me brush and ink. I took back the paper and filled in all 11 numbers in about 7 or 8 breaths. I already knew the answer by heart. I had created the puzzle. The original solver grabbed the completed sheet and stared at it. His eyes went wide. He started muttering about how the final squares contained multiple traps and how certain positions seemed like they could accept different numbers, but actually only had one correct solution. He kept repeating the word brilliant over and over. Other customers crowded around to look. They confirmed that every small box contained the numbers 1 through 9 without repetition. Every row was correct. Every column was correct. The puzzle was legitimate and solvable. The Wong kid quietly slunk away. People rushed back to their own tables with renewed determination. Someone shouted that since this sheet had a solution, theirs must too. The energy in the room doubled. I turned to Yuchi and told her we should head across the street now. I promised to cut open a jade stone and make her a bracelet. She answered so quietly I could barely hear her, but her eyes were shining. We crossed the street to Cloud Joy Tower. Despite losing a lot of customers to our Sudoku promotion, the place still had decent traffic. Not everyone in Chang'an understood math, so plenty of people had stuck with the jade gambling instead. We pushed through to the display tables where the 20 raw jade stones sat waiting. I tried to activate my light screen's recycling function on the stones, but initially it would not work. The items were not close enough or something about the display setup blocked it. I frowned. Yuchi noticed and asked what was wrong. I shook my head and told her it was nothing. Then an idea hit me. I opened the light screen manually and tried a different approach. The screen flashed with a notification. Item already recycled. Amount credited, 1,720,000 yuan. My balance jumped to over 3 million. My jaw nearly hit the floor. The system had somehow already processed the jade. Those were the exact same stones from the Wong family storage room. The ones I had recycled the night I rescued my sister. Wang Yuan had sent his remaining jade stones here for the grand opening promotion without realizing they were already gone from his inventory. The crates his men delivered to Chang'an must have been empty inside. I stood there in the middle of Cloud Joy Tower's entrance, surrounded by their customers, staring at stones that my system said no longer existed. The expression on my face must have been absolutely priceless. Standing at Cloud Joy Tower's display tables, I stared at those 20 jade stones and felt a chill run through me. My light screen had just confirmed something incredible. These were the same stones from the Wong family manor's storage room, the ones I had already recycled the night I rescued my sister. The system recognized them as already collected, which meant every single one of these so-called jade-filled stones was now completely empty inside. Just hollow rock shells with nothing valuable left in them. The coincidence hit me like a punch. This proved beyond any doubt that the Wong family manor and this restaurant belonged to the same person. The man who ordered my sister's kidnapping was running this business right across the street from Yuchi's restaurant. I looked up at the Cloud Joy Tower building as if I could see through the walls and find the person responsible. A cold anger settled in my chest. Yuchi noticed my expression and asked what was wrong. I shook my head and told her nothing. But inside, a plan was already forming. Since fate had handed me this opportunity, I was going to use it to humiliate the Wong family in front of the entire East Market. They hurt my sister. They were going to pay for it today. I sent Yuchi back to fetch Chimo. When he arrived looking annoyed, I pulled him aside and whispered my plan. I told him that every single one of those 20 stones was empty. No jade inside any of them. His eyes went so wide I thought they might pop out of his skull. He asked if I was serious. I told him there was no maybe about it. He could either trust me or forget the whole thing. Chimo stared at the stones for a long time, his huge eyes gleaming. Then he said he was in. He did not even care about the money. He had wanted to mess with the Wong family for years, and this was the perfect chance. But he insisted that Yuchi and I go back to the restaurant and stay out of sight. If things went wrong, he did not want us involved. I agreed. This was the kind of loud, aggressive confrontation that suited Chimo perfectly. Back on the third floor of Drunken Immortal House, I stood by the window watching the show unfold below. Yuchi kept staring at me curiously, trying to figure out what I had whispered to her brother. I told her to stop staring or I would eat her up. She huffed and turned away, but immediately went back to watching the street. Chimo marched up to the Cloud Joy Tower with 7 or 8 family servants and started arguing with their manager. The manager was a Wong family branch member and clearly a capable man, but Chimo was a military family's eldest son who argued like a battering ram. Logic bounced right off him. He just kept pushing and pushing until the manager was sweating through his collar. Then the door of Cloud Joy Tower opened and a man in fine silk robes walked out. My brother, standing behind me, went tense. He whispered that the man was Wang Yuan, the boss himself, the one who controlled all Wang family business in Chang'an, the one whose manner had held my little sister captive. I studied him carefully through the window. Narrow eyes, thin mustache, pale smooth face, an air of quiet menace. I told my brother I did not care if he was Wang Yuan or any other celebrity. Anyone who hurt my sister was going to suffer for it today. Down below, Chimo was startled to see the big boss come out personally, but he did not back down. He loudly complained that he had paid his 50 strings of copper, drunk their wine, and now wanted to participate in the jade stone gambling. But he wanted to bet the opposite way. Instead of betting that a stone contained jade, he wanted to bet that his chosen stone was empty. If he was right, Wang Yuan would pay him 100 strings. A 2-to-1 return. Wang Yuan was amused. He glanced up at me, standing in the window across the street. Our eyes met. I kept my expression calm and smiled faintly. He could not figure out who I was, but I could tell my presence bothered him. He agreed to the bet, but he added a condition. If the stone did contain jade, Chimo would have to return the jade and pay an additional 50 strings on top of what he had already spent. Chimo agreed without hesitation. The terms were exactly what I had predicted they would be. A crowd gathered quickly. New nobility versus old nobility, playing out right here on the street. Everyone wanted to see who would lose face. Chimo was thrilled by the audience. The more witnesses, the better. He was already imagining how his classmates at the academy would talk about this for weeks. He clapped his hands and called for a jade cutter. His people had come prepared. A man with tools was brought forward within minutes. Wang Yuan's eye twitched. Something was making him nervous, but he could not put his finger on what. Chimo pointed at the largest stone in the display, number 5, the one most likely to contain premium jade based on its size and exterior markings. Wang Yuan relaxed slightly. If any stone was guaranteed to have jade inside, it was that one. His confidence returned and a small smile appeared on his face. It did not last long. The so-called jade cutter, who was actually just the firewood chopper from our restaurant, picked up an iron shovel and slammed it down on top of the stone with full force. The rock cracked open like an egg. The crowd gasped, expecting to see green jade gleaming inside the broken shell. There was nothing. The stone was completely hollow. Just empty rock, casing with air inside. No jade, no mineral deposits, no color, nothing. The man held up the broken halves for everyone to see, then walked over and presented the evidence to Chimo. The crowd erupted. People were shouting questions over each other. How was it empty? They were told every stone was guaranteed to contain jade. Had the Wong family been lying? Was this whole promotion a fraud? Some people who understood stone cutting were about to scold the worker for his rough technique, but the empty shell shut them up instantly. There was nothing to damage because there was nothing inside. Chimo grabbed the hollow shell and held it up toward Wang Yuan with the biggest grin on his dark face. He reminded him cheerfully that the deal was 2-to-1, so that would be 100 strings of copper, please. Then, without waiting for Wang Yuan to recover from the shock, Chemu slapped down another 50 strings and pointed at the smallest stone in the lineup. He shouted for the cutter to crack that one open too. But before he could finish his sentence, something hit him and he yelped in pain. The chapter ended right there, and I was left hanging at the window, watching the chaos below with a satisfied smile. Wang Yuan's face had turned the color of ash. Those 20 stones represented the centerpiece of his entire opening day strategy. And I knew for a fact that every last one of them was as empty as a broken promise. Today was going to be a very expensive day for the Wang family. Just as Chemu was about to crack open the second stone, a heavy hand smacked the back of his head. A booming voice told him to stop showing off and get back inside immediately. Chemu spun around ready to fight, then froze. It was his father, General Cheng Yaojin himself, standing right there in the middle of the street with a face like thunder. Chemu deflated instantly. He looked across at Wang Yuan, who was watching the whole scene with a quiet smirk, then looked up at me in the third-floor window and shook his head helplessly. I was confused. The show had barely started. We had only cracked one stone, and there were 19 more sitting there waiting to be exposed as empty fakes. Why was the old general shutting everything down? Yuchi grabbed my arm with both hands, her face pale with worry. I asked her what was happening and who that man was. She hid behind my back and shook her head without answering. My brother told me calmly that the imposing figure down below was General Cheng Yaojin, the Duke of Su, one of the most powerful men in the empire. I watched as Cheng Yaojin turned to Wang Yuan with surprising politeness. He called the whole thing children playing around and asked Wang Yuan not to take it seriously. Wang Yuan bowed respectfully and said the Wang family honored its bets. Whatever was owed, they would pay. The two men exchanged courteous words that carried enough hidden tension to crack stone. Then Cheng Yaojin led everyone back into drunken immortal house. Behind them, Wang Yuan stared at our restaurant with poisonous eyes. He looked up toward the third floor where I had been standing, but I had already stepped back from the window. He ordered his people to deliver 100 strings of copper to our restaurant along with a fine piece of Hitian jade, paying his debt promptly and gracefully, even though I could tell he was seething inside. Upstairs in the private room, the atmosphere was suffocating. Chemu and Yuchi stood off to the side like two children waiting to be scolded. My brother leaned against the window, keeping quiet. I sat down directly across from Cheng Yaojin, as if we were equals having a casual meeting. The little maid Xiaohuan watched me with eyes full of admiration. Anyone who could sit calmly under the gaze of a man who had killed his way through mountains of corpses was worthy of worship in her book. Cheng Yaojin was a terrifying presence. Even sitting still, he radiated the kind of pressure that made ordinary people want to drop to their knees. But I am not from this world. I grew up watching actors play his character on television. To me, he was just a famous historical figure sitting in a chair, and honestly, I was more interested in the food on the table than in being intimidated. He stared at me for a long time trying to make me flinch. It did not work. Finally, he coughed awkwardly and broke the silence himself. He said he had heard that a young man's clever trick had earned the restaurant over 1,000 strings of copper in one morning, and he had come to see this prodigy for himself. He also noted that I apparently had talent in evaluating jade stones. I shook my head modestly and poured him a cup of wine. I started to address him as Duke, but he cut me off. He told me that since I was already close with his eldest son and his daughter, I should just call him Uncle Cheng. He said he could still bear that much familiarity. I hesitated for only a moment before climbing that ladder happily. I called him Uncle right away. Chemu and Yuchi exchanged shocked glances. My brother had a strange expression on his face that I could not read, but I did not care about formalities. In both my past life and this one, the man was older than me. Calling him uncle cost me nothing and gained me a powerful connection. Uncle Cheng asked me how I knew the jade stones were empty. I told him it was obvious. The stones were wobbling slightly on the display tables. Anyone could see they were hollow inside and had no real weight anchoring them. I suggested he go check for himself if he did not believe me. Chemu ran to the window and stared at the stones across the street. After a moment, he shouted excitedly that I was right. The wind was making them rock gently on the tables. He called Yuchi over to confirm. I smiled to myself. Of course they were wobbling. I had recycled all the jade from inside those stones. Without the heavy mineral core acting as ballast, the empty shells had no stable center of gravity. A stiff breeze was enough to make them tremble. Chimu came back from the window, looking frustrated. He muttered that they should have cracked open all 20 stones on the spot and collected 2,000 strings from Wang Yuan. His father immediately slapped the back of his head again. Yuchi covered her face with both hands, unable to watch her brother get hit. I noticed she quietly shuffled a step closer to me during the commotion, though nobody else seemed to catch that detail. Uncle Chung drained his wine cup and explained why he had stopped us. If we had publicly smashed all 20 stones and exposed them as empty, it would have looked like the Chung family was deliberately attacking the Wang family's business. The Wang clan would have used that as justification to openly wage war against all of Chung Yaojin's commercial interests. Nobody in the nobility would have defended us because we threw the first punch. I thought about it for a few seconds and then understood completely. The old general was absolutely right. I had been too eager for revenge and nearly made a terrible mistake. Uncle Chung walked to the window and explained the better outcome with a sly grin. The Wang family had publicly declared that those 20 stones were genuine high-quality jade rough from the kingdom of Gaochang. We had only opened one and found it empty. To outside observers, that meant the other 19 probably still contained valuable jade. Greedy people would line up to buy them. And one by one, stone after stone, they would all crack open to reveal nothing inside. I stood up and joined him at the window. I finished his thought for him. As each customer discovered their stone was hollow, word would spread. But it would not be the Chung family's fault. The Wang family had made the claims. The Wang family had sold the promises. When all 20 stones turned out to be worthless, it would be the Wang family's own credibility that collapsed. Uncle Ching nodded, looking very satisfied. We stood side by side watching the crowd gather around the remaining 19 stones across the street. People were already pushing forward to place their bets, convinced that the next stone would surely contain beautiful jade. After all, the Wang family had guaranteed it. I had to admit, the old man's strategy was far superior to mine. Let the enemy destroy themselves. All we had to do was sit back, eat good food, and watch the fire burn. Uncle Chung laughed heartily and threw his arm around my shoulders. The man had a faint body odor problem that nearly knocked me out, but he did not seem to notice or care. He turned to my brother and invited us both to stay at the Chung mansion for the night. He mentioned that the household cooking had improved recently, all thanks to Yuchi bringing back techniques she learned from visiting my village. Yuchi blushed deeply at that comment and kept quiet. Uncle Chung chuckled and said since we were guests, it would be rude to entertain us at the restaurant. He wanted us to come home with him so I could cook something personally. I grumbled internally about why I should cook for him, but then I glanced at Yuchi. She was already looking at me. We smiled at each other, and I let the old general drag me along without further complaint. The Duke of Su's mansion was not in the same district as the restaurant. It sat 2 blocks away in Yongjia district, right against the eastern city wall. Probably positioned there so Uncle Chung could keep an eye on the wall defenses. As we walked through the estate gates, I noticed the household staff giving me and Yuchi knowing looks. We were walking side by side, both nicely dressed, and every servant we passed seemed to arrive at the same conclusion. Their faces all said the same thing. They understood exactly what was happening here. Yuchi suddenly quickened her pace and apologetically told Uncle Chung she needed to go greet her mother first. He glanced at her, then at me standing there looking a bit lost, and a tiny smile crossed his lips. He told her to go ahead and to inform her mother that there would be a banquet tonight and she was invited to join. Yuchi froze for a second. Something about that instruction clearly meant more than it sounded like. She stole a quick look at me, turned bright red, whispered a soft yes, and ran toward the back of the mansion with her maid. I had no idea what that was about, but both my brother and Chumu seemed to be thinking very hard about something. Uncle Chung pulled me into a reception hall, and we all sat down. He immediately noticed the leopard skin wrapping on my brother's weapon. Now that Junmai had taken it off his back to sit comfortably, the unusual wide handle was clearly visible. Uncle Chung asked what kind of blade had such a broad grip. My brother looked at me for permission. I nodded. He unwrapped the leopard skin and revealed Frost's sorrow in all its glory. Chumu had seen it before and still gasped at how impressive it looked. Uncle Chung was completely stunned. He wanted to pick it up, but remembered the warrior's code about touching another man's weapon without permission. He respectfully asked my brother if he could examine it. My brother went further than just letting him look. He told Uncle Chung to feel free to test the blade however he wanted. That surprised the old general. Letting someone else swing your weapon meant either deep trust or absolute confidence in the blade's quality. My brother clearly meant the latter. Uncle Chung called for training equipment. Servants brought out wooden posts, straw dummies, and horse leg bones, setting them up in the courtyard where he apparently practiced daily. Chumu grabbed a bleached horse bone and excitedly held it up as a target. Uncle Chung charged forward and swung. The bone split in half with barely a sound. No cracking or splintering. The cut was perfectly smooth and flat, like slicing through paper. Uncle Chung stared at the clean edge in disbelief. He muttered something about wishing he had owned this blade during a past battle against some rival general. Then he launched into a full demonstration. He moved through the courtyard like a tornado, attacking every target in sight. The only sounds were faint whispers of the blade passing through wood and straw, like scissors through silk. I watched with my jaw hanging open. For a moment, I genuinely thought I had traveled into a martial arts fantasy novel instead of historical China. This man was inhuman. My brother stood in the doorway mimicking Uncle Cheng's movements, trying to learn his footwork and attack patterns. After about 15 seconds of acrobatics that included several backflips, Uncle Chung landed gracefully in front of my brother without even breathing hard. He grinned and asked how many moves my brother had managed to memorize. My brother admitted honestly that Uncle Chung was too fast and the techniques were beyond his current ability. Uncle Chung laughed and returned the blade, casually mentioning he felt a bit rusty since he had not exercised in a while. I cursed him silently. Rusty. Right. The man had just performed superhuman feats and called it stretching. Back inside, servant girls brought tea and snacks. Every single one of them found an excuse to peek at my face before giggling and running away. I touched my cheek wondering if I had food stuck somewhere. Then an older woman in formal servant attire entered the hall. She greeted Uncle Chung and announced that the lady of the house wished to meet the young master surnamed Shi. Before I could even ask a question, she was already standing in front of me with a polite bow, asking me to follow her to the back garden. I looked at Uncle Chung for guidance. He just nodded casually and said I should go. It was something that had to happen sooner or later. The old woman covered her smile with her hand and gestured for me to follow. My brother stayed seated, pretending not to see the desperate look I shot him. The estate was enormous. I walked for 2 or 3 minutes before reaching a courtyard with a bamboo pavilion. Inside stood Yuchi next to an elegant noblewoman. They were chatting and laughing, but stopped when they saw me approaching. Yuchi immediately buried her face and stood off to the side, sneaking glances at me through her hair. The noblewoman studied me openly. She looked momentarily confused by my Taoist robes, but then smiled warmly and waited for me to come pay my respects. I understood immediately who she was. Lady Cui, Yuchi's mother, quite possibly my future mother-in-law. My survival instincts kicked into overdrive. Showing up empty-handed to meet your potential mother-in-law was unforgivable in any century. As I rounded a decorative rock formation, I quickly opened my light screen and purchased a gift. When I reached the pavilion, I pretended to reach into my wide Taoist sleeve and pulled out the item. I told Lady Cui that I had not known what she might like, but I had recently acquired something interesting from a foreign merchant and hoped she would accept it. I handed the object to the old servant woman. She took it, glanced down, and screamed. The thing went flying out of her hands. My heart nearly stopped. I lunged forward and caught the object before it hit the stone ground. If it had shattered, that would have been a disaster. Yuchi and her mother had both jumped at the scream. But Lady Cui was a woman of experience. She quickly realized I would not bring anything dangerous as a gift. She looked more carefully at the object in my hands, and her eyes went wide. She whispered the words like a prayer. A crystal treasure mirror. What I was holding was a simple handheld glass mirror, something worth pennies in my old world. But in the Tang dynasty, clear glass mirrors did not exist. People used polished bronze that gave blurry, dark reflections at best. What Lady Cui was seeing was her own face reflected back with perfect clarity for the first time in her life. Back at the Chung mansion, the mood was celebratory. Cartloads of copper coins rolled into the family treasury from the drunken, immortal house profits. The accountant could not stop grinning. A business that had only ever lost money had just earned over 5,000 strings in a single day. In the courtyard, my brother was getting a personal martial arts lesson from Uncle Chung. The old general was teaching him a footwork technique through live sparring, feeding attacks for my brother to block and counter. They went back and forth like father and son, which was ironic because Chumu, the actual son, was sitting on the sideline looking delighted. He was thrilled that someone else had volunteered to be his father's punching bag for once. I could practically see him scheming to make my brother his sworn brother, just so the beatings would permanently transfer to a new target. Meanwhile, I was in the back garden, drinking tea brewed in the traditional boiled style, watching Yuchi and her mother fight over the mirror I had given Lady Chui. The two of them looked more like sisters than mother and daughter. Lady Chui was only 33, well-maintained, and spoke with a youthful energy that did not match the image of a stern noblewoman. She hip-checked Yuchi aside and told her to stop grabbing at the mirror. If she wanted one, she could ask me herself. Surely I would not leave her without one. Yuchi pouted and shot me a look that clearly said, "Fix this situation right now, or I will be very unhappy with you." I smiled awkwardly. The mirror had cost me 10 yuan on the light screen. 10 yuan. It was an aluminum-backed compact mirror, the kind you find in bargain shops back home for 2 yuan each. But these women were treating it like a priceless treasure. In the Tang dynasty, people used polished bronze for mirrors, which gave muddy, distorted reflections at best. A clear glass mirror was something they had never imagined possible. Lady Chui genuinely believed it was polished crystal, which would have been worth a fortune. I told Yuchi I would send her one later. Her eyes went huge with disbelief. She asked if I really had more. Even Lady Chui looked up from the mirror with a complicated expression. She had been trying to figure out what gift could possibly match the value of what I had given her. Hearing that I had several more made her reconsider just how wealthy or well-connected I actually was. I nodded casually and said I had a few extras. Yuchi looked ready to tackle me with a hug, but restrained herself. Lady Chui studied my face quietly, clearly doing some deep calculations about who exactly her daughter had brought home. Across the city at the Imperial Palace, things were moving in my favor without me knowing. Emperor Li Shimin was meeting with his 3 most trusted advisors in the Light Hall. Changsun Wuji, Fang Xinling, and Du Ruhui sat before him, while Little Huang and stood respectfully to the side, reporting on what had happened at the East Market today. The 3 officials had initially tried to cover their noses when Huang'an entered. Court officials knew that eunuchs often had bladder control problems and carried a strong urine smell. But Huang'an was different now. Thanks to the perfume spray I gave him, he carried a faint floral scent instead. Li Shimin had grown quite fond of this sharp young eunuch who always smelled pleasant and handled errands efficiently. Huang'an reported that General Cheng Yaojin had personally intervened at the restaurant standoff and afterward invited my brother and me to stay at the Duke's mansion. He described Uncle Cheng's warm and enthusiastic attitude toward me. Li Shimin smiled and dismissed Huang'an with another reward. The little eunuch touched his sleeve where the perfume bottle was hidden and walked out feeling grateful. After Huang'an left, Li Shimin turned to his 3 advisors and declared that my abilities were comparable to Fan Li, the legendary ancient strategist and merchant who mastered politics, business, and everything in between. The 3 officials exchanged uncomfortable glances. Comparing a teenage village boy to one of history's greatest minds seemed excessive. Li Shimin saw their hesitation and pulled out the paper formula I had sent him. He reminded them sharply that the Ministry of Works had already produced test samples based on my recipe. The new paper was slightly thicker and rougher than my store-bought sheets, but it was functional and cost a fraction of what rice paper cost to produce. This was not a small achievement. This was something that could transform the entire empire. Fang Xinling spoke first with his usual diplomatic precision. He acknowledged my talent, but cautioned against giving me an official position too hastily. I was just a rural commoner with no noble background. Appointing me directly would cause an uproar at court. However, the paper itself was a blessing that should be named and promoted immediately. Let the people benefit from it now, and let them associate that benefit with the emperor's generosity. His partner Du Ruhui stepped forward in perfect coordination. He agreed completely. He suggested waiting until after next year's imperial examinations to formally reward me. By then the court would be flush with new talent selected through fair competition, and recognizing my contribution alongside those scholars would feel natural and justified rather than forced. Changsun Wuji added the final piece. He pointed out that I was still too young. Entering the bureaucracy at 14 would do me more harm than good. Better to let me mature for another year or 2. When the time came, The Ministry of Works would be the perfect place for me. Li Shimin closed his eyes and sighed internally. His real plan had been much more ambitious. He wanted to marry one of his princesses to me, binding me to the imperial family permanently. Through that marriage, he could also secure my father Shikai Shan, who was apparently still alive somewhere serving as a secret imperial agent. But my commoner status made a royal marriage impossible without looking crassly political. He had hoped to first give me an official rank to solve that problem, but his advisors had just blocked that path too. He looked at the three men who had helped him conquer the empire and silently called them short-sighted. But he could not argue with their logic. My two biggest obstacles were clear: birth and age. My father's true identity as an imperial shadow guard could not be revealed. Shadow agents serve for life and secrecy. There was no coming back from that darkness into the light. Li Shimin accepted the situation with a nod and pulled out the A4 paper I had sent him. Besides the paper-making formula, I had included a suggestion for naming the new paper. I had quoted from the Book of Changes, explaining that the characters for Jingguan meant showing righteousness to the people. As emperor, Li Shimin should lead by example and demonstrate virtue to the world. Therefore, I proposed naming the paper Jingguan paper, after his own reign era. Li Shimin placed the paper on the table. Huang carried it over to the three advisors. They had seen the formula before, but the naming suggestion at the bottom was new. They read my words carefully, connecting the emperor's reign name to a product that would make education affordable for common people across the entire empire. A paper named after the emperor, spreading literacy in his name, carried by every scholar and student in every corner of the land. It was the kind of gesture that cost me nothing but would earn Li Shimin's lasting gratitude. And that was exactly the point. The next morning at the Wei Mansion, something fun happened that I only heard about later. Minister Wei Zheng went to inspect the public toilets that Sixth Uncle's team had just finished building. His steward was so excited he practically dragged the old minister to the back courtyard. The toilets looked nothing like our simple squat pits back in the village. These were proper facilities with Namu wood walls, green brick rooftops, and cute lanterns hanging from the eaves. I had drawn the signs myself before we left the village. A little boy figure for the men's side, and a girl holding a koi fish for the women's side. The men's and women's toilets were built on opposite sides of the courtyard with a garden and small pond between them for privacy. Minister Wei was impressed right away. He said the word, "excellent," before even stepping inside. The exterior blended perfectly with the rest of his elegant courtyard. It did not look like a toilet at all. It looked like a small garden pavilion. Inside, the steward showed him the urinal trough first. At one end was a bamboo tap connected to a water tank on the roof. Turn the tap and water rushes down through the trough, washing everything clean instantly. Wei Jing understood the concept immediately. Flush after use, and the toilet stays spotless all day. Simple but brilliant for this era. Then the steward opened a stall door to reveal the real masterpiece. A gleaming white porcelain toilet made by second grandpa back in our village. Wei Zheng's face changed the moment he recognized the material. He scolded the steward for using fine celadone porcelain, calling it extravagant. But the steward laughed and explained the numbers. The Wei Mansion had 4 toilets with 12 porcelain bowls total, and the whole lot cost only 4 strings of copper. That was less than half the price of a decent dinnerware set from the fancy shops. Wei Zheng's eyebrows shot up in surprise. The steward added that Sixth Uncle had only charged 10 strings of copper for the entire construction job, not counting the wood that the Wei family supplied themselves. Wei Zheng agreed that was extremely reasonable. Then the steward asked if the minister wanted to try the toilet. Wei Zheng looked embarrassed but nodded. He sat down to test it. Over at the East Market, I was saying goodbye to Chumu outside the drunken immortal house. Our group was ready to head home. I had been away from the village for 2 days, and I was getting anxious about things back there. After everything that happened with my sister being kidnapped, I did not want to leave the village unprotected for too long. Chumu had warmed up to me considerably over the past 2 days. His family's elders had clearly given their silent approval of my relationship with Yuchi, so he could not really object anymore, even if he wanted to. While saying goodbye, he was talking to me, but his eyes kept drifting to the leopard skin bundle on my brother's back. He wanted that sword badly. My brother noticed the staring and quickly tightened the straps holding Frost's Sorrow. After sparring with Uncle Chung for 2 days, my brother had learned an important lesson about not casually showing off your primary weapon. From now on, he would not even let people touch it, let alone borrow it. I laughed at the situation and made Chumu an offer. If he came to visit our village with Yuchi and stayed for a few days, I would give him a blade made from the same material. His eyes lit up immediately. He said he would figure out how to make the trip happen and would definitely bring Yuchi along. That was exactly what I wanted to hear. The more Yuchi visited, the closer we would become, and having Chumu as an ally within the Chung family was valuable too. After parting with Chumu, I did not head straight for the city gate. Instead, I led everyone deeper into the East Market. Winter was approaching fast, and our entire village still wore thin summer clothes. Some families back home had been sharing a single padded coat among all their members, taking turns wearing it when they went outside. That was going to end today. I told Sixth Uncle we needed to buy fabric and cloth in bulk. He agreed enthusiastically and patted the bundle under his arm. He wanted to pick up small gifts for the children too, since it would be a shame to visit the capital and return empty-handed. I pulled out a silk pouch and tossed it to Sixth Uncle without even looking inside. It was the one we had taken from those 4 Turkic soldiers I killed during our first encounter. My brother had been carrying it ever since. Sixth Uncle opened it right there in the street and counted the contents. His face went pale. 20 liang of silver. He told me that was enough to buy a full year's worth of clothing for every single person in our village. I shrugged and told him to spend all of it. Winter was coming, and I was not going to let anyone freeze. Not the original villagers, and not the new workers either. The village people who had come along for the toilet construction job stared at me with red eyes. Half of them were from our village, and half were outside laborers. The villagers looked grateful. The hired workers looked envious. But I had already decided in my heart that anyone who worked for me was one of my people. They would all get new winter clothes. Sixth Uncle stopped arguing and led the workers away to start a shopping spree through the fabric merchants. I watched them disappear into the crowd, then turned to my brother with a grin. I told him we had our own shopping to do. He nodded and followed me, but the moment I walked toward a cosmetics and perfume shop, his dark face turned red. He stammered and asked what exactly I was planning to buy in there. I laughed at his embarrassment and told him to relax. I needed to buy some nice things for our mother. She had been working nonstop managing the pickle workshop and worrying about us constantly. She deserved something pretty. And besides the gift for our mother, I also needed to pick up some raw materials. Ingredients for products I had been thinking about making. Perfumes, soaps, scented oils. Things that women in the Tang dynasty would pay good money for. Things that currently did not exist in this world, but lived clearly in my memory from a future 1,400 years away. My brother followed me into the shop without further protest. He trusted me enough by now to know that behind every strange decision I made, there was usually a plan that ended with our family being richer and safer than before. And he was right. Today's shopping trip was about more than buying cloth and cosmetics. It was about planting the seeds for our next wave of products. The food business had gotten us started. The magazine had made us famous. Now it was time to conquer the beauty market and make ourselves truly untouchable. The day after we got home, I called everyone in the village together on the East Hill. I climbed up onto our big flat stone that usually serves as a bench or dinner table, but today would be my stage. Sixth Uncle was already there, hauling bolts of cloth and stacking them on the ground beside me. Most of it was plain gray hemp fabric, but tucked underneath were several bolts of colorful silk that I had bought separately. I pulled out a list I had written the night before. It was a detailed plan for distributing rewards to everyone based on their work performance. I wanted to be completely transparent about how I ran things. People who worked harder would get more. That was my rule, and I was not going to hide it. First came the basic distribution. Every single person in the village would receive new cloth for autumn clothing. I used Auntie Jo as an example. Her household had 6 people, 3 adults, and 3 children. Adults got 4 feet of cloth each, and children got 2 feet each. That added up to 18 feet total, just enough for one complete outfit per person. Ugly Auntie and DeBeo stood ready with scissors and a measuring rope. They cut the fabric right there on the spot and handed it to me. When I called Auntie Jo forward and placed the cloth in her hands, she could barely believe it. She asked if I was joking. I told her this was no joke. All 178 people in the village would get new clothes this autumn. The woman's eyes filled with tears immediately. She was not the only one crying. All around the circle, women were hugging their children and elderly mothers, sobbing with happiness. Many of these families had never owned new fabric in their lives. They had been wearing the same threadbare rags for years, patching holes until there was more patch than original cloth. After every household received their share of hemp fabric, people started noticing something. A few families had not collected any cloth yet. My own family was obvious since we already had nicer clothes. But second grandpa, third uncle, sixth uncle, and a few others were also standing empty-handed. Some sharp eyes, especially old man Tion from the horse field, kept glancing at the colorful silk bolts still piled at my feet. I let the curiosity build for a moment, then announced the next part. This was the awards ceremony for outstanding workshop performance. Anyone not working in my operations could leave if they wanted. Nobody moved. By now, almost every family had at least one member working in one of my workshops. Even old man Tion stayed, though his horse breeding business was separate from mine. He stood there with furrowed brows, clearly thinking hard about something. I picked up my list and stated my philosophy plainly. I believe in rewarding people based on how much they contribute. If you work hard, you earn more. If anyone feels the distribution is unfair, look at your own work attitude first before complaining. Then I started announcing the awards. The top prize was for the 3 best workshop managers. Each would receive 1 full bolt of silk. A bolt is 40 feet long and 18 inches wide. That is enough material for multiple outfits of the finest quality. In this era, only nobility wore silk. The moment I said the word, the crowd went silent with shock. The first outstanding manager was third uncle from the printing workshop. He had been working day and night without sleep to produce the magazine. The man was standing in the crowd feeling sorry for himself because his wife worked harder than him, and he thought he did not deserve anything special. When DeBeo ran over and placed a bolt of blue silk in his hands, third uncle just stood there frozen. Aunt Hua, his wife, looked even happier than him. In their household, she controlled the finances, so that silk was essentially hers. The second outstanding manager was Ugly Andy from the kitchen. She had been running the food operation since day one, managing breakfast for the village, producing thousands of buns daily for the postal station orders, and never once complaining about the workload. When I called her name, she barely paused before walking up and selecting a bolt of red silk for herself. No false modesty from that woman. She knew she had earned it. The third name required a small speech. I told everyone I had considered many candidates and weighed many factors. But in the end, one person stood out as truly deserving. I looked toward Aunt Hua. She was still so overwhelmed by her husband's silk prize that she had not even noticed the entire crowd turning to face her. The women standing near her had to tug her sleeve and tell her she had been chosen too. Her family now had 2 bolts of silk. Aunt Hua looked at me with absolute disbelief. When DeBeo handed her a bolt of red silk, she broke down completely. She hugged the fabric to her chest and wept so hard that third uncle could not calm her down no matter what he said. I had not expected such a strong reaction, but I understood it. Since becoming manager of the dried fish workshop, Aunt Hua had been the hardest working person in the entire village. She met her daily quota of 300 jin of fish every single day. After finishing her own work, she would go help in the kitchen, then the pickle workshop, and sometimes even chop wood for sixth uncle's crew. She never stopped and she never asked for anything extra. There was no way I could overlook someone like that. After the manager awards, I moved on to outstanding individual workers. There were more of these. Each received 10 feet of new silk, blue for men and red for women. If anyone preferred the other color, they could trade among themselves. The crowd buzzed with excitement. Workers who had been putting in maximum effort every day without any special title or position finally saw that their dedication had been noticed. At noon, I hosted a private lunch in my family's courtyard for all the workshop managers. We sat around the stone table drinking fruit wine and eating good food. I raised a toast to second grandpa and sixth uncle first. They had not won outstanding manager awards this time. Second grandpa had done excellent work with the pottery workshop, making pickle jars and developing the porcelain toilet. But before I could finish my apologetic speech, the old man cut me off with a wave. He told me not to bother with the guilt routine. He was not that fragile. If he did not win this time, there would be a next time. And he fully expected me to send him some rare treasures come the New Year's celebration. I laughed and completely lost my train of thought. Sixth uncle poured himself another drink and told me not to feel bad. He said everyone could see that third uncle, Aunt Hua, and Ugly Annie had genuinely earned their awards. Third uncle in particular had transformed from someone the village had written off as irresponsible into a man who worked through the night producing books that were now famous across the capital. Sixth uncle raised his cup to third uncle and said he truly respected him now. This was the kind of man their village needed. Watching my people celebrate, argue about silk colors, and toast each other with cheap fruit wine, I felt something settle in my chest. This was what I was building, not just a business. A community where effort was rewarded and loyalty was returned tenfold. The village that had been starving and hopeless just weeks ago was becoming something real. 3 days after returning from Chang'an, life in the village had settled into a good rhythm. The awards ceremony was still the hottest topic around. Everyone was working twice as hard, hoping to earn recognition at the next round. Third uncle was especially fired up. He ran the school and the new printing workshop like a man possessed, publishing 2 issues of the magazine per cycle, right on schedule every rest day. I was sitting by Mulan Creek with my little sister, pretending to fish. My rod had no bait on the hook. I just liked the feeling of doing nothing for a while. My sister was splashing around catching shrimp and crabs near the shallow edge. The creek is deep in some spots, so I had to keep watch over her. Once the older kids finished their lessons, they could babysit her, but third uncle had them locked down tight in the classroom lately. I was enjoying the peace when DeBeo's voice came booming from the East Hill, telling me to get back immediately. Someone had come looking for me with a business proposal referred by Sun phone from the postal station. I looked at my right hand for a moment and laughed at myself. In my previous life, I had been a complete nobody with nothing going for me. Now I had a family, a village full of people counting on me, and a cheat system that could buy anything. What was there to complain about? Back on the East Hill, a young man about my brother's age sat waiting at the stone table. He was maybe 17 or 18, and his clothes were the most expensive I had ever seen on a visitor. From the moment I laid eyes on him, my light screen started flashing non-stop, detecting the jade pendants and gold ornaments hanging from his belt. I desperately wanted to hit the recycle button right there. He introduced himself as Huang Bin. I noticed a tiny hesitation before his surname, like he almost said something else, but I let it pass. His manners were polished and his bearing was confident. This was clearly someone from a powerful family. He slid an invitation card across the stone table toward me. The card itself was a work of art. The covers were made of gilded sandalwood, and the paper inside carried a strange floral fragrance. In my old world, something this fancy would only appear at million-dollar events. I read the contents and frowned. The order was enormous. 500,000 jars of pickled vegetables per month. 6 million jars per year. When I told him our workshop was too small for that kind of volume, he looked past me at the little pickle shed where my mother and a few village women were working. He asked if I was really going to pass up such an opportunity. I was tempted but honest about our limitations. Production capacity determines output. Besides, money was not as urgent for me right now. I had earned enough recently to build roads and houses for the village. I was not desperate. The young man was clever. He pointed out that there were countless hungry villagers in Jing'an County with nothing to eat. If I recruited them and organized a larger operation, 500,000 jars would be easily achievable. Even 1 million would not be impossible. That argument hit me where it mattered. He was right. I had been helping a small group of people, but winter was coming. Why not help more? Why not give hundreds of starving families work and food? I excused myself and ran to the pickle workshop to discuss production numbers with my mother and the women. My pickle jars are small, about the size of fruit cans from my old world. 500,000 jars sounds insane, but when you calculate the actual volume, it was doable with 3 conditions. First, Second Grandpa's pottery workshop would need to massively increase jar production. Second, we would need vegetable suppliers from multiple villages since Old Man Tian alone could not grow enough. Third, we needed a huge expansion of our workforce. I thought it through and decided it was possible. I went back to the young man and agreed, but with one condition. No contract. I would sell him whatever we could produce each month, but I would not lock myself into a binding agreement. His forehead vein twitched for just a second before his smile returned. He asked when we could start delivering. I told him we had about 30,000 jars in storage and could spare 25,000 right now. He seemed disappointed by the small number, but I explained that the postal station and the Imperial Palace both had standing orders that came first. The mention of palace deliveries made him pause noticeably. He took a breath and accepted the initial shipment of 25,000. Before he left, I asked him to pay in gold or jade instead of copper coins. Copper was too bulky to store safely. He almost slipped up again, starting to say his family name before correcting himself. He said gold was scarce in his household, but jade could be arranged. I agreed without fussing. Money was money regardless of the form it took. That night in Chang'an, inside a private room at the Emerald Willow Pavilion, the young man sat across from Wang Yuan. The same Wang Yuan who controlled all Wang family operations in Chang'an. The same man behind my sister's kidnapping. The young man's real name was Wang Bin, not Huang Bin, and he was a direct member of the Taiyuan Wang clan's main family line. Wang Yuan warned him not to lose focus. This was supposedly a training exercise assigned by the clan, and Wang Bin had been given the highest starting position among his generation's candidates. But Wang Bin was not interested in his uncle's cautious approach. He told Wang Yuan that his vision was too narrow, limited to just Chang'an. The Wang clan's influence stretched across the entire empire. The pickles that Wang Yuan was afraid to sell in the capital could be distributed through their networks in Luoyang and Yangzhou, cities with populations rivaling Chang'an. That was millions of potential customers. Wang Yuan's hand tightened around his wine cup until the veins stood out. Wang Bin was openly talking about building alliances with the 6th and 10th branches of the family, political moves that could threaten the current clan leadership. Wang Yuan warned him that the family patriarch and his older brother Wang Huai would not tolerate such blatant maneuvering. Wang Bin dismissed the concern with a sneer. He compared the current patriarch to the retired Emperor Gaozu, implying he was an old man clinging to a seat that someone younger and stronger deserved. If Li Shimin could seize the throne, then Wang Bin could seize the family headship. All he needed was half the elders' votes. Wang Yuan stared at the nephew he had watched grow up, realizing with a mixture of fear and grudging respect that the boy had become genuinely dangerous. He sighed and offered one piece of advice. Wang Huai had just been appointed chief manager of Chang'an County. If Wang Bin was serious about his ambitions, he needed to make sure his older brother never gained enough achievements to overshadow him. So the Wang family was not just one enemy. It was a nest of vipers fighting among themselves, and I had just agreed to supply one of them with 6 million jars of pickles per year. I had no idea what I had walked into. What I did not fully understand at the time was how deeply my cheap paper was shaking the foundations of power across the entire empire. To explain why, I need to step back and talk about how the world I landed in actually works. The great noble clans, the so-called 5 surnames and 7 families, had controlled China for nearly 1,000 years. Their power came from one simple trick. They monopolized education. Books cost a fortune because paper cost a fortune. Only wealthy families could afford to educate their children. Only educated people could become government officials. And officials naturally helped their own families gain more wealth and influence. The cycle fed itself generation after generation until these clans became more powerful than emperors. The Sui dynasty tried to break this cycle by creating imperial examinations that let commoners compete for government positions based on merit. The noble clans responded by destroying the Sui dynasty entirely. When Li Yuan founded the Tang dynasty, he had to pretend he belonged to one of these clans just to get their financial support. Without their money, he could not have fed his armies, let alone conquered the country. Now these same families had grown so arrogant that they openly looked down on the imperial household. Li Shimin once tried to marry his daughter into the Chui clan, and they rejected him, saying his bloodline was not pure enough. That is how powerful these people were. They could insult the emperor to his face and get away with it. My paper changed everything. When Li Shimin stood before the entire court and announced that the Ministry of Works had successfully produced Jingguan paper at 10 coins per bundle, the noble clan officials immediately started whispering among themselves. They understood exactly what this meant. Cheap paper meant cheap books. Cheap books meant poor families could finally educate their children. Educated commoners meant competition for government positions that the clans had monopolized for centuries. One invention threatened to unravel 1,000 years of carefully accumulated power. Li Shimin did not silence the whispering. He just smiled and exchanged knowing glances with Changsun Wuji, Fang Xianling, and the other new nobility officials. This was their victory. The new nobles who had risen alongside Li Shimin had always been crushed under the weight of the old families. Now they had a weapon. Even Changsun Wuji's family, technically an old clan themselves, had been bullied by the 5 surnames for decades. They were more than happy to twist the knife. The officials performed the expected ritual. They dropped to their knees and thanked the emperor for his benevolence toward the common scholars of the realm. Li Shimin knew that fewer than 10 of them actually meant it. But watching the clan officials force those words through clenched teeth was satisfaction enough. I knew none of this was happening when it happened. I was busy dealing with my own problems and opportunities back in the village. But the ripples from that single sheet of A4 paper I had sent to the palace were spreading faster and farther than I could have imagined. Meanwhile, at the Wei mansion, things moved quickly after court ended. Minister Wei Zheng went home and walked into a conversation already in progress. His steward and his wife Lady Pei were discussing a letter I had sent. I had written to ask if the Wei family could lend me 500 workers from their estate for the new expanded pickle operation. I offered 3 meals a day and 100 coins per month for each worker. Wei Zheng's wife was from the Hedong Pei clan, one of the great families herself. She had married Wei Zheng back when he was the crown prince's top advisor and seemed destined to become prime minister. The noble families had been eager to connect with him then. Now he was just a minor official with a fancy title and no real power. But his wife had kept her backbone. The steward had been calculating the numbers with Lady Pei. 500 workers producing 500,000 jars per month meant each person only needed to pickle about 1,000 jars. That was completely manageable. Lady Pei was enthusiastic. She saw the opportunity clearly. Winter was coming and many families on their rural estates were going to struggle. Giving 500 people steady meals and wages would be an enormous act of goodwill that cost the Wei family nothing. When Wei Zheng heard the details, his first reaction was caution. He worried about the political optics. 500 people gathered in one place could be accused of illegal assembly, the same charge the county magistrate had used against me before. He did not want trouble. Lady Pei was having none of it. She snatched the letter back from her husband and told the steward that if Wei Zheng was too timid to act, she would provide the workers from her own family estate instead. Her people lived farther from my village, but with guaranteed food and wages through the winter, she was confident plenty would volunteer. The steward nodded and said he would head to my village the next day. He needed to restock the mansion's pickle supply anyway, since they had run out again. He glanced at Wei Zheng's embarrassed face, shook his head, and walked out. He had long since given up expecting his cousin to pay attention to household matters when state affairs occupied his mind. Wei Zheng sat there looking sheepish. He was not a bad man. He was actually one of the most principled officials in the empire, famous for criticizing Li Shimin to his face when he thought the emperor was wrong. But domestic business bored him. He understood perfectly well that my paper had just reshaped the political landscape at court that very morning. What he failed to grasp was that the pickle operation his wife was so excited about would soon reshape the economic landscape of an entire region. I did not know any of this yet either. I was back in my village, planning workforce expansion and calculating how many pickle jars second grandpa's pottery workshop could produce. The mysterious young man who called himself Huang Bin had placed the largest order I had ever received, and I had 3 major problems to solve before I could fulfill it. More jars, more vegetables, and more hands. What I also did not know was that Huang Bin was actually Wang Bin, a direct heir competing for leadership of the Taiyuan Wang clan. He was not buying my pickles out of kindness. He was using my product as a chess piece in a family power struggle that stretched across 3 of China's largest cities. And Wang Yuan, the man who had kidnapped my sister, was now caught between his loyalty to the current clan leadership and his nephew's naked ambition. I was a 14-year-old boy selling pickled vegetables. They were 1,000-year-old aristocrats playing games with empires. Somehow our paths had gotten tangled together, and I had a feeling that before this was over, one side was going to swallow the other whole. The new pickle workshop needed a proper location. Our village is tiny, just 1 incense stick's worth of walking to circle the whole place. But the surrounding land is vast and unclaimed. This era actually encourages people to clear new ground and farm it. I picked a hillside about 500 paces downstream from Mulan Creek. One side faces the sun, perfect for drying vegetables. The other side stays shaded, ideal for storing fermented pickles. The creek is close for water. Sixth uncle loved the spot too because the hillside was covered with trees he could cut down for building materials. 500 workers showed up from the Wei estate. They were technically servants who had come with Lady Pei as part of her dowry when she married Wei Zheng. In this era, they are called tenant farmers, but honestly, they are closer to slaves. The 100 coins per month I pay goes to Lady Pei first. Whether she passes any of it to the workers is her business, not mine. I cannot fix every injustice in this world. Not yet anyway. The Wei family steward stood beside me on the hillside watching the construction begin. He patted my shoulder and told me I had done well. He said the powerful people above me were willing to provide cover so I would not become a target. I agreed with a smile and said I liked my current quiet life. But I told him I had a feeling things would change once I turned 15 next year. He gave me a curious look and asked what I meant. I did not answer. I just had this gut feeling that my peaceful days were numbered. Construction moved fast with 500 strong backs working together. The workshop would be finished in 3 or 4 days at most. Since there was nothing useful I could do on the construction site, I walked the steward back to the village, fed him a good meal, loaded 200 jars of pickles onto his cart as a thank you gift, and sent him home happy. But I had more pressing business waiting. Back at my house, a woman in her late 30s was chatting warmly with my mother in the courtyard. This was my Aunt Lu Ying, my mother's younger sister and her only surviving family. She was the one relative we actually stayed in contact with. When I walked in, both women looked at me with gentle eyes. My aunt waved off my apology for making her wait. She said I had grown up a lot since she last saw me. No longer the quiet, gloomy boy she remembered. I laughed awkwardly. That gloomy boy was the original owner of this body, not me. My aunt got straight to the point and asked why I had invited her here. I pulled a small white plastic medicine bottle from my pocket and placed it carefully on the stone table. Both women stared at it with curiosity. I took a breath and said something that changed the mood instantly. I told my aunt that I knew her daughter, my cousin Li Qing'er, had been sold to the Wang family estate by her gambling husband. My aunt's face went dark with pain. She nodded quietly and said that by the time she found out, it was already too late to stop the sale. I pushed the medicine bottle toward her and made my offer. I would pay to free my cousin from the Wang estate and give her a home in our village with a respectable job. She would never have to serve those people again. But I needed her help first. Just 20 days. My aunt picked up the bottle and examined it. She had never seen plastic before and had no idea what the strange white material was. I unscrewed the cap and tapped out a single small white pill. I explained that the people who kidnapped my little sister were from the Wang estate. My mother tensed up beside me. She knew the story and was still shaken by it. My aunt's eyes narrowed. She asked if I knew the identity of the person responsible. I looked at my mother and said yes. Not only did I know who it was, I had met him face to face in Chang'an. The man's name was Wang Yuan, the chief manager of all Wang clan operations in the capital region. I explained what the pills did. A woman who takes them suffers no ill effects whatsoever. But if a man consumes them regularly for 20 days, something very interesting happens to his body. The pills dissolve in water with almost no color or taste. They would not kill anyone. I made that clear. But the effects on the male body would be permanent and deeply unpleasant. My aunt studied my face carefully. She asked if there really existed a poison that only harmed men and left women untouched. I hesitated at the word poison, but honestly, she was not wrong. For a man, what these pills did was arguably worse than poison. I confirmed that the substance only affected males and worked gradually over 20 days. No sudden symptoms, no suspicious illness, just a slow, invisible transformation. My aunt did not ask any more questions. She had expected me to ask her daughter to assassinate someone. Learning that the mission was far less dangerous put her at ease. She took the bottle and promised her daughter would handle it. That evening, my aunt did not go straight home. She detoured to the Wang family estate and met with my cousin in secret. She told Qing'er everything. When my cousin heard that the Wang family had kidnapped her little cousin, the 4-year-old girl she had bounced on her knee as a baby, she did not look surprised. She looked furious. She clenched the medicine bottle and agreed immediately. Then she said something unexpected. Besides Wang Yuan, there was another person she wanted to target. She asked her mother to get a second bottle from me. My aunt was alarmed and asked carefully whether someone had hurt her inside the estate. My cousin shook her head. It was not her who had been violated. It was another girl who had entered the estate with her. A friend who had suffered things my cousin refused to describe. My aunt felt a mix of relief and horror. Her daughter was safe for now, but how long before it was her turn? My cousin gripped the bottle tightly and gave her mother a reassuring look. She promised to protect herself and asked again for the second bottle. Back in the village, I sat alone reading the instruction sheet that came with the medicine. The first 4 characters of the label told me everything I needed to know about what these pills would do to Wang Yuan's body. I looked toward the north, in the direction of the Wang family estate, and pictured that man's thin, smirking face with his narrow eyes and wispy mustache. I muttered to myself that he bore a striking resemblance to Yu Buqiuan, the famous fictional swordsman who castrated himself for power. In about 20 days, the resemblance would become much more accurate. I crumpled the instruction sheet into a ball and tossed it in a perfect arc into the fire pit. Then I spoke to the empty air one last time. I said that whether Wang Yuan ended up like Yu Buqiuan or the Eastern Invincible, it did not matter. He chose to mess with my family. Now I was going to play this game with him all the way to the end. After my aunt left, my mother sat on the stone bench looking troubled. She kept glancing at me like she wanted to say something, but could not find the words. I was playing hopscotch with my little sister in the courtyard, pretending everything was normal. The little monkey kept losing and demanding do-overs with that shameless grin of hers. I let her cheat every time because seeing her laugh made the guilt in my chest hurt a little less. My mother understood more than she let on. She knew my sister's kidnapping happened because of my growing business. She knew the medicine I gave my aunt was meant for revenge against the Wang family. She was torn between a mother's instinct to protect her children from danger and a mother's fury at the people who had taken her baby girl. I watched her face shift from worry to acceptance and back again several times before I finally called out to her softly. She looked up. I smiled and told her everything would be fine. She stared at me for a long moment, then nodded. My smile was enough. My sister noticed the exchange and abandoned our game to run over and grab our mother's leg. She dragged her back to the hopscotch grid and started explaining the rules with the authority of a tiny general. My mother laughed and scooped her up for a kiss on the forehead. For that one moment, the 3 of us were just a normal family enjoying an autumn afternoon. Meanwhile, 5 miles away at the Jingyang postal station, Constable Chui was dealing with an unexpected problem on my behalf. The station had transformed completely in recent weeks. Baked goods, pickles, and my magazine had replaced mail delivery as the primary revenue sources. Chui was riding high. People came from everywhere trying to learn his supply connections, offering serious money for information. He kept his mouth shut every time. The old fox understood that his position depended on being the exclusive middleman between my village and the outside world. But that morning when he came to pick up his daily bun order, he noticed something that worried him. The 500 workers I had hired for the new pickle workshop all came from Lady Pei's estate, which was over 10 miles away. Not a single person from the neighboring villages around our area had been selected. This was creating resentment. The surrounding villages had been watching our rise with growing interest. Many families were desperate for work. When word spread that I was hiring 500 people, they assumed at least some positions would go to them. Learning that every spot went to outsiders felt like a slap in the face. They did not understand the politics behind it. They did not know that Minister Wei Zheng had blocked his own estate workers, and his wife had supplied hers instead. All they saw was that I had chosen strangers over neighbors. Chui pulled me aside and explained why this mattered. He gave me 2 examples that hit home immediately. First, if my workshops ever caught fire, not a single neighbor would bring a bucket of water to help. I had snubbed them today, so tomorrow they would watch me burn with cold eyes. Second, the land and water sources between villages were shared by tradition, but only as long as everyone got along. The moment goodwill disappeared, disputes over streams and fields could turn violent fast. I had seen enough rural dramas on television to know he was right. Villages fighting over water rights was a real thing that destroyed communities. I needed to fix this before the resentment hardened into something permanent. The pickle workshop was full. I could not add more workers there, but I still needed people for many other projects. The pottery workshop required massive expansion to produce enough jars for 500,000 pickles per month. I needed farmers to grow more vegetables across multiple villages. I needed laborers to clear new land, build roads, and construct housing. The list of tasks was enormous and growing every day. I asked Chui to handle the recruitment announcement. He was the local authority figure that people trusted, and he knew every village chief within 20 miles. He agreed immediately and headed back to the station to spread the word. That afternoon, The postal station hall was packed with village leaders and desperate families who had heard the news. Chui climbed onto a table and addressed the crowd with his booming voice. He explained that I had originally planned to hire from the nearest village, but someone else had gotten there first. He told them not to be discouraged because there were plenty of other positions available. An elderly village chief spoke up first. He understood the situation and asked directly how many people the pottery workshop needed. Before Chui could answer, everyone started shouting questions at once. Some worried that only 50 spots were available like last time, which would barely make a dent for communities numbering in the thousands. Then several women from a village called Zhangxia pushed to the front carrying baskets. They lifted the straw covers to reveal carefully washed eggs. They begged Chui to put in a good word for them. Their village had lost most of its men to the Turkic invasion, and the surviving women and children were starving. Without work, they would not survive the winter. One woman said her children had not eaten rice or wheat in over a month. Another said that if things continued this way, their village would die out completely. Chui gently pushed the egg baskets back toward the women and told them he did not accept gifts. The women's faces fell with despair. But then Chui continued speaking, and their tears turned from sadness to overwhelming relief. He announced 3 categories of hiring. The pottery workshop needed 500 workers. Those with crafting skills would negotiate their own wages. Regular laborers would receive 3 meals daily with 2 liang of meat at lunch, plus 100 coins per month. That alone was enough to keep a family alive through winter. Second, I was buying vegetables, fruits, and crabs in bulk at fair market prices. Whatever people could bring, I would purchase. No limits on quantity. No haggling. Just honest prices for honest goods. For villages with streams and fields, this meant they could earn money immediately without even leaving home. Third, I needed 800 strong laborers for road construction and land clearing. These were short-term positions. Workers would receive 3 meals a day, but no cash wages. Even so, 3 guaranteed meals during the approaching winter was worth more than money to families facing starvation. The hall erupted. Village chiefs started counting their available people on their fingers. Women clutched their baskets of eggs and wept openly. The news spread through the station and out into the surrounding roads within minutes. By evening, every village within walking distance would know that the boy from Xiago was hiring again, and this time, the doors were wide open. The next morning before 7, nearly 1,000 people from surrounding villages gathered outside our village. Constable Chui had organized them overnight. Each village chief had handpicked their strongest and most capable workers. But these were not ordinary laborers looking to earn spending money. Chui pulled me aside at the village entrance and told me something that hit hard. The village chiefs had made an arrangement among themselves. Every worker selected would share half their daily meals with the people back home who did not get chosen. Their logic was brutally simple. The ones who got jobs were responsible for keeping everyone else alive through winter. However many survived depended entirely on how much food these workers could bring back. Chui was not trying to pressure me. He was trying to make me understand that what was happening in Jingyang was happening everywhere across the empire. Countless people were one cold snap away from death. I nodded without saying much and told second grandpa and sixth uncle to start assigning tasks. My mind was already racing ahead to the next problem. I had just added over 1,000 mouths to feed. The flour and ingredients I bought through my light screen were enough for the village, but this was a completely different scale. I needed to either find better ways to hide my purchases or just go to Chang'an and buy grain openly like a normal merchant. While our village buzzed with activity, news of my mass hiring reached Minister Wei Zheng. To my relief, he did not object this time. He simply told his steward to check in on us occasionally. The steward was actually relieved. He had been worried the old minister would stubbornly refuse to acknowledge the benefit. Every winter, the Wei estate spent nearly all its tax revenue on porridge distribution, emergency grain supplies, and repairing village houses crushed by heavy snow. If Lady Pei did not occasionally bail them out with her own family money, Wei Zheng probably could not keep his tenants alive at all. My operation was quietly solving a problem that had been draining the Wei family for years. The steward kept these thoughts to himself, of course. Telling Wei Zheng he was bad with money would accomplish nothing. The minister was reading the latest issue of my magazine, completely absorbed in the crossword puzzle on the last page. Just as the steward was about to leave, Wei Zheng remembered something. He asked the steward to deliver 10 jars of pickled garlic to his friend Wang Gui. The steward sighed internally. 10 jars at 30 coins each was 300 coins, the same as a servant's monthly wage, and they had just sent several jars a few days ago. But Wei Zheng waved it off as a small matter between friends. The steward walked out grumbling and immediately ran into a servant announcing that Wang Gui himself had arrived for a visit. The steward scratched his nose. He had literally just been complaining about the man, and here he appeared in the flesh. Some people really cannot handle being talked about. Wei Zheng heard the announcement and put down his magazine to greet Wang Gui personally. In the reception hall, Wang Gui sat looking pitiful. He stared at Wei Zheng with sad puppy eyes that made the minister deeply uncomfortable. Wei Zheng snapped and asked what that look was supposed to mean. Wang Gui's little mustache twitched with indignation. He accused Wei Zheng of being a terrible friend who had deliberately deceived him. Wei Zheng had no idea what he was talking about. Wang Gui checked that nobody was eavesdropping, then asked if Wei Zheng remembered the young Taoist who had caused a sensation at the East Market. The one who created that mathematics puzzle and helped the Chung family earn thousands of strings of copper in a single day. Wei Zheng nodded. He remembered the story well. He had actually expressed interest in meeting this mysterious person. He admired anyone who could devise such an elegant mathematical challenge, regardless of what the snob said about using scholarship for commercial purposes. Wang Gui slammed his hand on the table. He demanded to know why Wei Zheng had pretended not to know the young man's identity when he clearly had been protecting him all along. Wei Zheng was genuinely confused now. He had no idea who the Taoist was. Wang Gui studied Wei Zheng's face carefully, realized the bewilderment was real, and deflated. He had wrongly assumed Wei Zheng was hiding information. With a tired sigh, Wang Gui revealed the truth. The blue-robed Taoist was none other than me, Shi Yunfei, Shi Kaishan's second son, the same boy Wei Zheng had been quietly shielding for months. Wei Zheng shot to his feet. He stood there frozen for several seconds before sputtering out a confirmation. The young genius who had dazzled the entire East Market with a never-before-seen mathematical game was the same teenage pickle maker from a tiny village? Wang Gui nodded. His wife had visited the Chung family mansion personally and heard it straight from Lady Chui's own mouth. There was no doubt. Wei Zheng sat back down slowly. He thought through everything I had done recently. The paper formula, the magazine, the food business, the restaurant rescue. When he lined it all up, my involvement in the East Market spectacle actually made perfect sense. The surprise faded into something closer to resigned acceptance. Of course it was me. Who else would it be? He looked at Wang Gui, who was still sitting there looking miserable, and asked the obvious question. Why had he really come today? Wang Gui's expression shifted from sad to embarrassed. He pulled a thick accounting ledger from his robes and placed it on the table. His wife had ordered him to get their family finances sorted out. Wang Gui freely admitted he had zero interest in business management and was completely useless at it. He wanted to know if there was any chance I might be willing to help. Wei Zheng took the ledger and opened it. Every single page was swimming in red. Deficit after deficit after deficit. Wei Zheng's own household finances were nothing to brag about. But this was impressively bad. Wang Gui was not just careless. He was spectacularly lazy about money. Wang Gui's eyes lit up when Wei Zheng half-jokingly suggested handing his entire estate over to me. Wei Zheng immediately shut that idea down. Too much too fast would create problems. Better to start with one business and see how it went. Wang Gui looked disappointed but agreed. He wished he owned a restaurant since that seemed like the obvious choice given my cooking skills. But he did not have one. Wei Zheng flipped through more pages of financial disasters until something caught his eye. He stopped on a particular entry, and his expression brightened. He turned the ledger around and pushed it toward Wang Gui. This one, he said. Start with this. Wang Gui looked down at the page Wei Zheng had selected. I never found out exactly what business it was during this conversation, but knowing my luck, it was probably something that would drag me into yet another complicated situation involving powerful people, ancient rivalries, and more work than any 14-year-old should reasonably handle. Back at Wei Zheng's mansion, the minister and Wang Gui were looking at the ledger together. The page Wei Zheng had selected was about a place called Little West Mountain, a small estate that Wang Gui owned near the western hills outside Chang'an. Unlike most estates that grew grain or raised livestock, this one was covered in rocky terrain and wild forest. The only thing that grew well there was fruit trees, specifically persimmon trees, the famous fire crystal persimmons that wealthy people in the capital love to eat. The catch was that persimmons only taste good if picked during a narrow window right after the first frost. Before that, they are unbearably bitter. After that, they rot on the branch. So the estate only made real money for about 2 weeks out of the entire year. The rest of the time, those thousands of persimmon trees just sat there being useless. To make things worse, everyone and their neighbor had started planting persimmon trees after seeing how well they sold a few years ago. Now the market was flooded and prices had crashed. Many farmers did not even bother harvesting anymore. They just let the fruit fall and rot. Weijing suggested this estate as the test case for me. His reasoning was clever in a way that annoyed Wang Gui. If I could take a failing persimmon farm on rocky ground and turn it into something profitable, that would prove my abilities beyond any doubt. Wang Gui grumbled that he just wanted to earn enough money for a decent New Year celebration, not set up some elaborate examination of a teenager's business skills. But Wei Zheng had already made up his mind. He wanted to see what I could do with something truly difficult. Wang Gui sighed and accepted the challenge on my behalf, without even asking me first. Meanwhile, back in my village, the day started before dawn. My announcement about buying vegetables at market price had spread like wildfire. Old farmers who could not sell their crops anywhere else came streaming in from every direction. Dashin and Debeo had been working since 4 in the morning, organizing workers to haul purchased vegetables to the new pickle workshop on the hillside. The biggest problem was transportation. These farmers had no horses or carts. Draft animals were precious in this era. Entire families would walk for miles carrying maybe 300 or 400 jin of vegetables on shoulder poles. At that rate, getting all their produce to our village would take 4 or 5 days of backbreaking trips. When I strolled over after breakfast, I overheard several old farmers asking Second Grandpa about renting our horses and carts. Second Grandpa did not dare make that decision alone and flagged me down to explain the situation. I shook my head immediately. My worst horse was still worth 70 or 80 strings of copper in Chang'an. These farmers had nothing of equal value to put up as collateral. If something happened to the horse or cart, I would have no way to recover the loss. I was not being cruel. I just could not afford to be careless with assets that valuable. But I did not leave them stranded either. I suggested they rent from the postal station instead. Constable Chui had plenty of horses and carts, and he would jump at the chance to earn rental fees. Second Grandpa's face lit up at the obvious solution, and he hurried off to tell the farmers. I stood watching the organized chaos of our purchasing operation from a distance. For a moment, the scene transported me back to my previous life. For in the morning outside a wholesale vegetable market, farmers and vendors haggling over cabbage and radishes under harsh fluorescent lights. Some things never change no matter which century you live in. People growing food, people selling food, people buying food. The eternal cycle. Debeo's voice yanked me out of my daydream. He was waving me over, holding a bamboo basket and looking confused. When I walked closer, I saw the basket was full of tiny puppies huddled together for warmth. Their eyes were not even open yet. A dozen little bodies pressed against each other, whimpering softly. I picked one up and asked Debeo what kind of dogs they were. He did not know and turned to the man who had brought them. The seller was a hunter in his early 30s. Lean muscle, sun-darkened skin, wild hair and beard, a bamboo bough on his back and a rusty short knife at his waist. He bowed nervously and corrected us in a stuttering voice. These were not dogs. They were wolf cubs. I almost threw the one I was holding. But looking down at the tiny creature squirming in my palm, I had to admit that baby wolves and baby dogs are indistinguishable. Both are impossibly cute and helpless. I studied the little wolf for a while, weighing the odds of it growing up and biting my face off someday. The hunter watched my hesitation with mounting panic. He clearly thought I was about to reject the deal. I asked Debeo what the man wanted for them. Debeo said he was asking for 500 steamed buns. Not money. Buns. I stared at the hunter in disbelief. 500 buns for a dozen wolf cubs seemed absurdly cheap. The hunter misread my expression and immediately started negotiating against himself. 300, he stammered. Then 200. Debeo jumped in with his merchant instincts and started talking the price down further, pointing out that the cubs had barely any meat on them and would die within 3 days without proper feeding anyway. The hunter's shoulders drooped lower with every word. He was about to offer 50 buns when I cut Debeo off. I asked the hunter directly if he was sure he only wanted 500 buns. The poor man panicked again, thinking I was angry at the high price. He dropped to 50, begging and stuttering worse than ever, mentioning his family waiting at home.